In 1927, studio head Louis B. Mayer had a dream to unite the 5 branches of the film industry: actors, directors, producers, technicians, and writers. His dream was to stop them all from unionizing so that he could continue to reap the rewards of their hard work and live the life he had become accustomed to. So he summoned 36 of the most prestigious names of the time to a banquet and explained his plans. And after collecting $100 from each of them, they formed the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I found that the best way to handle filmmakers was to hang medals all over them. If I got them cups and awards, they'd kill to produce what I wanted, old Louis B. said. And on March 16th, 1934, in the comfort of the Fiesta Room at the Ambassador Hotel, the 6th Academy Awards were held. And today, many, many years later, Moronic Logic is proud to present Golden Boy! Welcome to the 6th Academy Awards from 1934. Tonight's nominees for Golden Boy: Smiling Through by Sidney Franklin, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang by Mervyn LeRoy, A Farewell to Arms by Frank Borzage, Cavalcade by Frank Lloyd, State Fair by Henry King, She Done Him Wrong by Lowell Sherman. This is a lot of movies. 42nd Street by Lloyd Bacon, Lady for a Day by Frank Capra, The Private Life of Henry VIII by Alexander Korda, Little Women by George Cukor, and anyone else? Okay, I guess that's it. Welcome to the 6th Academy Awards and Golden Boy, Episode 6. The only show that breaks historical ties by making even more complicated and convoluted ties. This show right here. Expect it. I'm your host, Kenny Cahoon. You might know me from my other show, Presenting Alfred Hitchcock, here on YouTube, and the Hitchcock Challenge podcast. Check us out at moroniclogic.com. The Hitchcock Show does deep dives into each of his films in chronological order. We do everything on this channel in chronological order. I think you should know that by now. That show, along with my co-host Sam Holland and Lance Hawthorne, does deep dives into each of his movies. We do the research, we read the books, we look at people in the background of that movie, and we see who their grandfather was. This show, not so much. Every month on Golden Boy, I am joined by a friend, family member, co-worker, cobbler, expert, or detective working a particularly difficult homicide. And we watch every movie nominated for Best Picture in the given year. We tell you what to skip, what to watch, and what movie should have won the Golden Boy that year. Newsflash, they are now calling them Oscars. Somebody has called them Oscars. Somebody has, and we are going to get to that as soon as our guest arrives. We're going to talk about that. I'd like to thank Jessa Goldstein, the executive producer of the show, responsible for carefully selecting every one of these ties and making sure they're suitable for the audio podcast, especially. I'd like to thank Sam Holland and Lance Hawthorne, the co-creators of Moronic Logic. That show, Presenting Alfred Hitchcock, will have new shows appearing on the 15th of every month. Fingers crossed Santa brings us a new episode December 15th. I'm really trying hard, people. I'm really trying hard. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So if it shows up, please put your like and subscribe down on that one. And I'd like to thank this week's guest. I might know him from Budlong Baseball. He was the catcher, his father the coach, and I mostly the guy that struck out a lot. He won an All-State Acting Award and was class president our senior year of high school. A fellow comic nerd, his deep love and knowledge of Star Wars and pop culture movies is impressive. He is a man of many hats, literally, if you know him. He was a projectionist, screenwriter, manager, teacher, founding member of Poor Man Productions. Actually, number 5. I've had them all on the show at this point. He was our guy at the computer, the heart and soul, who sat in the back of the room smoking a figurative cigar. He was the judge and director of a New England screenwriting competition for over a decade, ran a movie theater, currently coaches his daughter's softball team, coming full circle in life as he passionately grows that league. He is chivalrous, one of my best friends, and the first guy I'd call to drive cross country and bail me out of prison. Jeff Somerville, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you. That was a very sweet introduction. Did I win an all-state acting award. I don't think I won one. I think it was you. I remember being told that 2 of the judges really liked me and one of them did not.
So
wait, you did though.
Let me just clarify.
Have you mentioned that you won, but they left your envelope underneath the table?
I think I was mixing up biographies.
Yeah.
Yes, I won. They dropped it on the floor under the table, and then they came up and this was after they had done the whole picture, and everybody had gone up.
And we were all like, "What just happened? We didn't get anything." And then they were like, "Oh, by the way, Kenny won, but we left it underneath the table." So but there will be no record of this whatsoever because it
was for me the greatest moment of running up, everyone standing and clapping as I'm running from the back of the room to retrieve my piece of paper.
Yes,
that was just on the floor. Yeah, it was fun. Jeff, thanks so much for doing this. Right. I'm glad to have you on the show. You watched all 10 of these movies?
I did watch all 10 of them.
Yep. I have to ask.
Just under the wire.
When did you watch the last one?
I think it was like just about 9 o'clock last night.
Do you want to spoil us and tell us what the last one you watched was?
The last one I watched was Cavalcade.
You saved the winner.
I did.
Cavalcade won this Academy Award. You saved it for last.
I did.
The winner has only won once on Golden Boy. The third episode where Gavin picked all of the movies to win. He happened to pick the movie that won Best Picture. So that's
when you pick all of the movies, you kind of
when you pick all but one, there's a good chance you picked the one that won.
I will not be picking all 10 movies.
You won't be? All right.
No, there's only one.
People at home, I just want you all to know that I solemnly swear as the host of the show that I will never pick more than one movie. But my co-hosts I hope they'll at least write a movie that was nominated or that was in this year.
Nominated? You guys already broke that rule.
Okay, there's no rules on this show. Never mind. Scratch all of that. Jeff, what do you know about history and this time in history? We're talking 1933.
So it's kind of like 32 and 33, right? The awards were given in 34. So we're like right into kind of the heart of the Great Depression after the stock market crashed in 1929. I imagine when most of these movies were being made, Herbert Hoover was still president of the United States, and then FDR took over in 33. I don't know how much blame either one of those guys should get for what we're dealing with at this point in history. Generally, the president gets blamed for everything that's happening. But
yes,
that's probably something we can discuss on another podcast about presidential history.
It's a pretty in-depth topic. I think I was researching just like Great Depression causes of it, and it's just there's still debate today, and it's over like 20 to 30 different factors. It's like we're not gonna break that down on this show.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of that too. So
this is a big Oscars because the last one was in 32. There was none in 33, as you just mentioned. 34, they have this one, and a lot has happened in between. Now, I read in this year book Behind the Oscar Academy Awards.
Yes.
So with the Great Depression striking, it hit Hollywood, and one of the things that happened was the Academy negotiated this sort of 50% pay cut. And I'm probably overgeneralizing and simplifying, but the idea was that everybody from the studio heads to the lowest worker would take a 50% pay cut for a period of time. And then, when things got better or when the period of time was over, go back. There was a lot of problems because there's a big difference between the guy making like, $1 million, suddenly making $500,000, and the guy who was making $50 a week, suddenly making $25 a week and can't pay his rent. The writers in the Academy sniffed out right up early. They were like, this is not good. We're gone. And they all left the Academy en masse and started the Writers Guild. The actors hung on a little longer until, of course, when that time period ended, they were still getting docked pay. And then they had it and broke off and started the Screen Actors Guild. The Academy is now kind of falling apart and in shambles, and their job is kind of arbiter or coming up with the compromises to keep the industry running. That job was over. So we're just at basically doing award shows. So in between that time, you get the actors breaking off, the writers breaking off, which relates to kind of what's happening today. How good we have those guilds that are able to fight for the rights of these lowly paid workers.
Yeah, and they both were just in the midst of these massive strikes that kind of shut everything down for the majority of the year. And then the writers went on strike in May, and it ended like 6 weeks ago or something. And then the actors ended about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, as of this recording. They haven't even ratified the deal yet, because there's still some actors that are kind of irritated about what they agreed to, because they didn't get everything they wanted. They are trying to fight back on how much artificial intelligence was allowed to be used, because they don't want to lose the rights to their own likeness. I don't think they got as much protection as they were hoping to get. None of the details have been released on that yet. Yeah. The writers did fairly well, from what I understand, but everything's back in production to a certain extent. So hopefully they don't have to shut it all down again. Yeah. If the actors say no, go back to the table.
The other thing about these Oscars is this is the last pre-code Oscars, because 1934, the Hays Code goes into effect. All of these movies were 33 or 32. So these movies all technically are pre-code, although as people who have watched last couple episodes know, the code has been sneaking in to some, and a lot of these movies, you can tell the code has kind of hamstrung some of them. But after this, we're all in the code years, and we're going to see more Hollywood fantasy and less, I guess, you want to say like salacious things, like dirty poor people and prostitution and drugs and crime. You get those, but they're evil people going forward. There's not the nuance of like the good person doing bad is not going to be in Hollywood very much. So you're our last pre-code guy here, Jeff.
Oh, yeah, that's exciting. I think some of the versions of these movies, from what I was reading, were edited post implementation of the code. We can get into that when we get to them. There was only one that I could find specific stuff that was cut out of that I could say like, oh, I didn't see that in what I watched.
Jeff, what I want to do with you before we get into these movies, we have to come up to a consensus on this. This show decides things. We are the authority on things, even though we mostly tie on everything and don't come up with a solid answer. We're going to try, though, you and I.
Okay.
There are 5 names associated with the first time anyone ever called a Golden Boy the Oscar. I'm going to run through this list of 5 names and kind of why they are associated. And you and I are going to elect. We're going to give a Golden Boy to the person who named them Oscars. All right. Okay. That person will live on in this show, their legacy as the person.
And all we have to go on is what you have written down in front of you right now.
These facts, which I am going to read to you. Open your ears, dear listeners. I've compiled these from different sources, Wikipedia, and from an article called "Why Are the Academy Award Statues Called Oscars" by David Hiskey from 2022, as well as a article by Joan Mosley in a blog post, Einar Lilleberg and the Oscar. Culprit number 1, Walt Disney. At the 1934 ceremony, this Oscars, number 6, Walt received an Oscar for the animated short Three Little Pigs that had gotten more than 80% of the vote of the Academy for the honor. It was the first award given out that evening. Walt came up to the podium with his head covered in bandages because he had been injured in a polo match with Will Rogers, who was the MC that night. Will Rogers was the star of State Fair.
Yes.
I don't need to tell you guys that little factoid, but I felt like it's a good image to have in your head, just kind of Walt Disney beat up from a polo match. Many claim that during Walt Disney's Academy Awards acceptance speech, he referred to the statuette as his little Oscar, which was supposedly an already well-established nickname for it within the industry. The term Oscar was commonly used as a mocking nickname for the Academy Award. This is someone else claiming that. But Walt was the first one to publicly use it in a positive light. So we got the first person to ever say it. Walt did 1934. But there's a lot of people that will say, well, he heard it from somewhere else. Second person, and this person claims that they came up with the term. Journalist Sidney Skolsky. The Academy credits Skolsky with the first confirmed newspaper reference to Oscar in his column on March 16th, 1934. Written about that Academy Awards. That is the same day as the Academy Awards. That article came out. So did Walt Disney read the news article and then say it at the thing? Possible. So here's just a quick quote from Sidney Skolsky for us to learn about his character and see what we think. It was my first Academy Awards night when I gave the gold statuette a name. I wasn't trying to make it legitimate. The snobbery of that particular Academy Awards annoyed me. I wanted to make the gold statuette human. It was 12:30 when I finally arrived at the Western Union office on Wilcox to write and file my story. I had listened to the academy, the industry, and acceptance talk ever since 7:30. There I was with my notes, a typewriter, blank paper, and that Chandler feeling. You know how people can rub you the wrong way. I'd show them acting so high and mighty about their prize. I'd give it a name that would erase their phony dignity. I needed the magic name fast, but fast. I remembered the vaudeville shows I'd seen. The comedians having fun with the orchestra leader in the pit would say, "Will you have a cigar, Oscar?" The orchestra leader reached for it, and the comedians backed away, making a comical remark. The audience laughed at Oscar. I started hitting the keys. That's all I'm going to read from it. The question I have on that is, did he write the article after the show where Walt Disney had already said it? Or did he write it?
I don't know. That sounds to me like I was thinking like that he had already heard it somewhere as well.
It does. It weirdly sounds like he heard it from someone, but he's also claiming that he came up. So
he's like, well, I heard these guys joking about it, so now I'm gonna coin the phrase myself.
Yeah.
Now this is I decide that this is what they are now.
Maybe I shouldn't have read it in such a sneering way. Maybe I should have read it in a more like literate way. But
Well, it sounds like he didn't really care for all these actors giving themselves awards either. These phony balonies going up there and patting themselves on the back for making pretend.
Well, he was on to them. I mean, that they were invented as in sort of, cups and awards. All right, person number 3, and this person takes himself out of the running, but we have to address it. Actress Bette Davis. Bette Davis, in her 1962 autobiography, claims she named it in 1936 after her first husband, Harmon Oscar Nelson, of whom the statue's rear end reminded her. But we already know the term had already been being used 2 years before 1936. And in a later commentary, she wrote, "I relinquish once and for all any claim that I was the one. So the honor is all yours to the Academy." But her story for years is the one, like, if you look in books, there'll be a lot of people saying Bette Davis said it looked like her husband's rear end, Oscar. Just so we all know, she says, "I'm out. Take me out of the running."
That's a bummer, because I'm willing to bet that that's the best story.
The best
of all of them.
That's probably why that one stuck around, because people are like, oh yeah, his little gold butt. That could look like something.
Yeah.
All right, so now we got our last 2 candidates who are maybe our stronger ones, although the journalist is too. Number 4, executive director of the Academy from 1945 to 71, and the Academy librarian from 1936 to 43, Margaret Herrick. She said that she named it after her uncle Oscar. The only corroboration was a 1938 clipping from the Los Angeles Examiner in which Herrick told the story of her and her husband joking with each other, saying, "How's your Uncle Oscar?" talking about the Oscar. So she was a executive director of the Academy. So she's someone who works in the Academy. You feel like you should take her word for it.
Sure.
But she was also there in 1936, and we already know Walt Disney said it in 1934. So questionable. Last but not least, number 5 on this list. Let's move along. Secretary Eleanor Lilliburg. Eleanor Lilliburg, no pictures I could find of her online. She doesn't have a Wikipedia page, but she was the executive secretary to none other than movie mogul Louis B. Mayer.
Oh.
When Eleanor first saw the gold statue, she told her boss that it looked like King Oscar II. She reportedly said to Mayer at the end of the day, "What should we do with Oscar? Put him in the vault?" She was in charge of the trophies. So, like, her job was handling the trophies at the original Oscars. And the second thing with her was from executive director of the Academy, Bruce Davis, who wrote a book, The Academy and the Award, which came out in 2022. He claims an autobiography by Einar Lilliburg, Eleanor's brother, that stated Lilliburg called the awards Oscar after a Norwegian army veteran she knew in Chicago that Einar says always stood straight and tall. Davis says that the Norway King Oscar II story was a misconception. The king, whose image was widely known because it was featured on sardine tins, apparently didn't look like the Oscar statuette at all. Unsought though it was, the credit for originating one of the world's best-known nicknames should almost certainly belong to her, according to Davis, based on those 2 possible, either the King Oscar or she knew a guy named Oscar who stood straight and tall. Those are our 5 people that are all connected.
Is there a year attributed to everything? I mean, you can probably rule out the 36 one, right? Well, I mean, I guess we're going to make this decision later.
No, we're going to decide right now. These people at home can't wait. They want to hear about smiling through.
Right, we're start digging here. Well, when you were reading the Disney story, you mentioned that it was possible this term was used in circles around Hollywood well before this. It was a nickname that was kind of floating around that people called it behind the scenes. And then Disney happened to say it on stage. And then we've got the writer who may or may not have been reacting to Disney saying it, or also these other stories floating around Hollywood. And then we've got the possibility of
Eleanor Lilleberg,
Lilleberg,
secretary in charge of handling the awards.
So it's possible that she referred to the little guy as Oscar as far back as the first year.
29, yeah.
Yeah, so I would, you know what, I'm going to give it to her. I'm going to give it to Lilleberg.
And the Golden Boy for naming the Oscars goes to Eleanor Dagny Lilleberg. Go ahead and put them in the vault, Eleanor. We don't want Sid Skolsky stealing them. Lilleberg! Eleanor Lilleberg!
Eleanor Lilleberg should get the credit, because I would say it's reasonable to guess that if she coined this phrase as far back as like 28, 29, so this started getting out, and then Disney finally said it on stage.
He was a frequent guest at the Oscars, too. He was nominated like almost every year, so he had been to Oscars before this, so there's a good chance he'd have heard it. I like it, because I also think, just deep down, you feel like if your job, if like someone's like, Jeff, you're in charge of these awards, make sure you don't lose any, and you got to put them in the vault at the end of the night and bring them out. Like, that would be the perfect person to come up with a nickname for it, because like I got to deal with these little Oscars, you know? So tell your friends, Eleanor Lilleberg.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff, you ready to talk movies?
Sure, why not?
Smiling Through came out September 24th, 1932, directed by Sidney Franklin. I watched this on Amazon. It was like $3 and change, maybe. Jeff, how did you watch this movie?
I watched all of them on Amazon, except for one.
So yeah, Amazon is like $3 to rent. Length, 98 minutes. Stars Norma Shearer as Kathleen and Moon Yeen, uncredited. And Frederick March as Kenneth Wayne and Jeremy Wayne, uncredited. Also has actor Leslie Howard as Sir John Carteret. It was nominated once for Best Picture. That's it. Smiling Through is a 1932 American pre-code MGM romantic drama film based on the 1919 play of the same name. It was adapted from the play. Now, these synopsises are mostly from Wikipedia, edited down to me. I don't have a ton of time always to write these, and a lot of times when I do, they're very snarky, and I don't want to always be snarky with you guys. I want to be straight. In 1868, Moon Yeen Clare dies tragically on her wedding day. But the film starts in 1898, when the groom, John Carteret, is revealed to be a rich old man that lives as a hermit and still hangs out at her grave. Her ghost hangs out there too. John wants to stay miserable until he dies and can be with Moon Yeen again. But his lifelong bud, Dr. Owen, has some tough news. Moon Yeen's sister and husband died in a car accident and left their 5-year-old daughter, Kathleen, tragically alone. Dr. Owen thinks John should be her caretaker. And after an awkward scene where the girl shows an old man her underwear, he does. But cut to 1919 and Kathleen grows up to be the spitting image of Moon Yeen. While caught in a rainstorm with Willie, a guy totally trapped in the friend zone, the two stumble upon a mansion everyone forgot about and run into Kenneth Wayne. Kenneth and Kathleen fall in love instantly, and after a bunch of awkward dates where Kenneth reveals he's a window peeper, Kathleen decides to tell old Sir John about the romance. And he hates it, calling her disgusting. Turns out Kenneth is the son of Jeremy Wayne, the man who killed Moon Yeen on the day of her wedding. After drinking potion and turning into Mr. Hyde, after getting drunk at home and becoming a sociopath, Jeremy Wayne tried to shoot John but killed Moon Yeen, the woman he also loved, accidentally. So Sir John puts his foot down. No adopted doppelganger of my dead fiance will be dating the son of my dead fiance's murderer in my house. He threatens to cut her off from all of his wealth if she continues with the romance. Kenneth is actually quite poor, as we see him stuffing pastries into his pockets in one delightful scene. This despite him owning a crumbling mansion. But he's off to fight in World War I, at least he will be, after about 10 minutes of Kathleen begging him not to go and repeatedly telling him how much she loves him. During that, he's off to the front. But oh no, Kenneth comes back with a war injury and is ready to be done with romance for good. Thank God John has a last-minute metaphorical change of heart, giving his blessing to Kathleen to be with the man she loves. John then has a literal change of heart when his heart stops working and his ghost gets to be with Moon Yeen's ghost, and they ride off in a wedding carriage together. Jeff, what'd you think of this movie?
All right. So first up, I I did not dislike this movie. There's a lot of, and this just can, I guess, be attributed to the times. There's a lot of like, hi, how you doing? I'm in love with you. We're not going to waste any time developing anything because we need to get right to what's happening between these two characters. She's with this other guy. A lightning bolt destroys a tree right in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
They break into this guy's house, and it turns out to be this giant mansion of the guy that killed what would have been her aunt. This other guy just weirdly walks in the middle of the whole thing and pretends that he's also broken into the house for a little while. So it's like there's a lot of times in these movies where the women are falling for these guys that are kind of icky. And she literally falls for this other guy, love at first sight, while the first guy is sitting there in the room with them. He just like plops down and all the dust comes up and he's just sitting there all like, what's going on? This was one of the ones that I kind of like, a lot of it didn't stick with me. It was kind of hard figuring out who exactly this movie was about, honestly. Like who's the protagonist in the story. It's supposed to be the guy who was marrying Moon Yin.
Oh, Sir John Cataract.
Yes, Sir John. I think it's supposed to be his movie. Then it goes away from him for long stretches when we're focusing on the couple that's in love.
Yeah.
So you could also argue that it's her movie.
Yeah, Kathleen.
Because she is kind of introduced after the beginning as like the main character. Everything's revolving around what's going to happen with her and her life, but then we end with Sir John. He's the one who goes through something, right? He's the one whose character changes. He can't move on until he grants them permission to be together, and then he's allowed to move on to the afterlife. And then we get to see his ghost move on and be with Moon Yin. So like the story is his. He's the one who changes, who has to overcome something. The lovers are sort of like there to service like where he's going. So it was kind of hard, watching it and seeing like, well, who's this really about? He said he spent forever looking around for the guy that killed Moon Yin and never found him. So he's been miserable the whole time. So like there was a point where I was wondering, like, is that guy going to circle back into the movie at some point? Because there's been like no solid.
I don't think there's ever a definite how he died given in the movie. I think it's just they went overseas, had his son, and then his son's coming back for the family house.
Right.
And I went into this movie really wanting to like it. I love Norma Shearer she was in The Divorcee, which is a movie that I picked for Golden Boy. I think she's great. I love Frederick March. I awarded him the Best Actor award at the last Golden Boy. He was in the first tie. He played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That scene where he drinks the thing and goes is totally a reference. They're playing up that whole, this guy, people know him as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So I was like, I'm on to you, movie. It's funny when you watch these movies in order and you see that popular movie you liked. We got that guy back and he plays another kind of sociopath.
Right.
And a nice guy.
Norma Shearer was very good.
Yeah, she was. And I felt like she was really giving it her all. It's so much corny romance dialogue, like so much, like over and over, just different ways to talk about love and how they love each other.
Yeah. And like that was nearly half the movie at one point. They keep going off to meet in this little cafe. There's every single time they got together. You're right. That's all the dialogue was completely like, isn't it great that I love you and you love me? I
think the window peeping thing, that was weird to me. I feel like in the modern day, if you tell someone, oh yeah, I like to peep through people's windows.
Yes.
There's an immediate like, what the hell?
Yes, several of these movies, the women fall for these guys that are like this guy.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. You're right. And we're going to talk about Little Women in a little while. And there's a window peeper in that one, too. I hate to say it. I think this one ranks my lowest. If you couldn't tell from my very satirical synopsis at the beginning.
So Smiling Through is your number 10?
This might be my number 10. And I think the reason why is because we're moving into the post-code. This feels like a code movie. We got our lead actress, Norma Shearer, who I just loved as a modern woman sleeping with multiple men and like starting to figure out her life in the city in The Divorcee. Yeah. And now we've got her as she's controlled by her dad's whims or stepdad's whims, I guess. Yeah. She has no career aspirations in this movie. She has no identity outside of just being this pretty daughter who's now a love interest. I think she would have made a good detective based on that Nancy Drew scene in the mansion where she figured it all out. This is the type of role Hollywood wants to give women going forward. This, like, you're the love interest for the guy. And there wasn't really anything super sexy in this movie. Like, there was no scenes of, like, they talk about romance a lot, but you never see them kind of really starting to get it on or having a romantic scene like that. I remember there was nothing.
There were a few things that I would say that kind of like, I mean, when he came back from war and he was all messed up and he like refuses to be with her because he's a damaged man now. A lot of these movies deal with what war does to a man. You enlist in the army and you're super excited to go fight. And then you come home and you're like, that was hell. And it just changes you. And then they didn't spend a lot of time on that. They introduce that and then they pull away from it almost immediately.
These World War I movies moving away from World War I, like where you're getting years past, they get the gist of like the post-traumatic, but it feels less like a main plot like it is in the earlier movies right after the war, kind of like All Quiet on the Western Front, or even Wings, where like those movies where you're really focused on like the effects of the war. This kind of feels like it's a character beat.
Right. It's like a superficial surface level, like he's dealing with this and he's messed up. So he's going to reject her because he couldn't possibly like live up to what she needs anymore. And,
yeah, it felt like a manufactured. And Jeff, I also thought when I first saw him walking off the train, I'm like, what is this man's injury? And why can't he? And literally, I was thinking he had his junk shot off. Like that, I was thinking that's why. If you had your junk shot off, no way you want to get back with the ex-girl, right? You're like, I'm half a man, leave me be. And he walked like he was walking on his two legs. So I'm like, his legs aren't gone.
Yeah, because he says I'm all shot to pieces.
Yeah,
but they don't say what pieces. Because he looks fine to an extent. He doesn't look happy. No, and he comes off the second train. This was interesting to me too, is like, is this the way it was where they brought in the train, we're all the guys who are happy, we made it, we're okay. And then later on, they bring in the second train so they can hide how awful it was. And it's like, we got all the broken guys on the second train when nobody's around. So nobody has to see how messed up these guys are. Now that you say that did kind of occur to me quickly for a second. I think I just kind of like thought for a moment, yeah, that might be what happened. And then he fell down. And then I thought, it's 1933. There's no way they're going there.
It's sad too, because I feel like if they had gone there, I probably would have liked this movie a lot more. And been like, that's a really complicated situation.
Right. And then because then you're raising like, well, what makes a relationship?
All those words of love.
Physical piece, if you can't entirely, if you can't have physical love, can you still have a marriage and a lasting partnership? But then, I mean, at that point in time, we got 15 minutes left in the movie, and there's just not enough time to deal with something that's that heavy.
So maybe they cut that plot.
Yeah, I was compelled by Sir John's story about him holding on to like this terrible thing that happened to him, not being able to move on, and then putting that on his child as like the thing that ruined my life is also now going to ruin your life. The father's issues, trickling down to ruining the children. So there were things in the movie that I'm like, wow, I wish they had dealt a little bit more with that and spent less time on us sitting in a cafe, talking about love. Besides
the containment narrative, as Tony would say, of keeping the woman in the household that this movie goes to, is also wealth. I think post-Code, we start to get into characters who are independently wealthy. Like, we don't see characters working as much. Like, it's more of this fantasy of rich people, in a sense. This movie tries to address, and I think, the Depression is addressed in a lot of these movies. And I think the scene of him stealing the pastries is meant to connect with the Depression crowds at that time, to be like, oh, he is poor because he's stealing pastries. But it's the only time we really see him poor. And the other thing we know about him is he owns a mansion. Yeah, granted, it's falling apart, but that land's got to be worth something, right?
Never occurred to me that he wasn't really
well-to-do.
That he, like you said, he had the house and everything. It just, that scene to me, like I said, I immediately thought like, okay, this guy's not a good guy, because I connected it back to like he's been stalking her the whole movie. Maybe this guy is a seedy dude. I never thought about any of those bigger issues that a lot of the other movies deal with, a little bit more in depthly. Was it this movie? I mean, and a lot of it probably depends on which release you see. You would cut to another scene while someone was talking.
Yes.
But the audio would drop out And I'm like, wait, they're still talking. And it just goes to the next scene. And you're like, whoa, what was going on there?
That happened in this movie. That was
Okay.
my notes. There's no transitions. This movie's just
Exactly.
cuts.
It's just the audio drops out, the guy's still talking, and we go to the next scene. Why didn't you just fade out instead of like leaving that on the screen? The scene is still going, but they're just like, all right, we're done. The last thing I wanted to say, so a lot of these are adaptations of stage plays, and some of them feel like community theater to me. You can tell like they basically just took the script for the stage and turned it into a screenplay instead of actually adapting it for the medium. Is this like, we've got a scene and then it's over and then we have to change the set. It fades to black and then we fade back in and we're in a different place, but it doesn't feel like, you really changed where you were.
Yeah, I think it's a sign of just weaker directors. I mean, this director, Sidney Franklin, I didn't really look him up or anything, but I don't have him down as directing any. This might be his first movie that's nominated for a Best Picture. To me, it's not a movie that makes me think, boy, I got to go check out another Sidney Franklin movie after this.
Right.
What this movie had was two really great actors, and it's ghosts, so you're like, God, ghost story, this is kind of cool.
That was like a sort of interesting aspect of it too. Like, is this guy so far gone that he imagines speaking to her, or is she literally visiting him from beyond the grave? Is he miserable because she can't move on? He's just so broken that he can no longer communicate with her at some point. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. And then they went to another scene in the cafe where we love one another.
Yeah. So imagine being that guy's best friend, the guy who comes over and plays chess with him all these years. And like this, for like 30 years, this guy won't leave the mansion. And he's just he's like, hey, what's going on? Thinking about Moon Yin again? Yes. And he still comes over for chess. I'd be bored out of my mind. But all right, let's move on. Jeff, ready? I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang came out November 10th, 1932, directed by Mervyn LeRoy. We both saw this on Amazon. This one was a $2.99 rental in Markstown. 93 minutes, stars Glenda Farrell as Mary, his wife, Paul Mooney as James Allen, Helen Vinson as Helen, and Edward Ellis as Bomber Wells, another prisoner. This movie received 3 nominations. 1, Best Actor for Paul Mooney, 1 for Outstanding Production, and 1 for the sound recording. It won none of them. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang is a 1932 American pre-code crime drama film about a wrongfully convicted man on a chain gang who escapes to Chicago. The film was written by Howard J. Green and Brown Holmes from Robert Elliott Burns' 1932 autobiography of a similar name, I Am a Fugitive from a Georgia Chain Gang, originally serialized in True Detective magazine. The true life story was later the basis for the television movie The Man Who Broke 1,000 Chains, starring Val Kilmer. Despite Jack Warner and Daryl Zanuck's personal interest in adapting Burns's book, Warner Brothers Story Department voted against it, with a report that concluded, this book might make a picture if we had no censorship, but all the strong and vivid points of the story are certain to be eliminated by the present censorship board. The story editor's reasons were mostly related to the story's violence and the uproar that was sure to explode in the Deep South. In the end, they had the final say, Warner and Zanuck, and they approved the project. Roy Del Ruth, the highest paid director at Warner Brothers, was assigned to direct, but he refused the assignment. In a lengthy memo to supervising producer, he explained, this subject is terribly heavy and morbid. There is not one moment of relief anywhere. He argued the story lacks box office appeal and that offering a depressing story to the public seemed ill-timed given the harsh reality of the Great Depression outside the walls of the local cinema. All right, let me read the synopsis. Sergeant James Allen returns to civilian life after fighting in the Great War, a changed man. After his traumatic life and death experience, he longs to serve a purpose in the world, to be an engineer that helps improve society and makes a positive impact. But the world has other plans for him, as his family want him to take his old factory job and remain a cog in the machine, similar to his life in the military. Allen decides to gamble on his future by leaving home to pursue his dream, but finds it hard to break in, chasing jobs across the country. Still optimistic, but walking the railroads looking for work, he gets promised a hamburger by another tramp, and instead gets caught up in a botched robbery and sent to 10 years imprisonment in a chain gang labor camp. Life at the camp is hell, as guards abuse prisoners regularly with sadistic glee, and the only way out is permanently maimed after serving your sentence or in a pine box. Allen plans a daring escape and manages to successfully elude his pursuers. Again, following his dreams, he finds work in Chicago as an engineer, slowly rises through the ranks. His landlady, Marie, soon discovers his secret and forces him to marry her or else. He does, though it is a loveless relationship. She cheats on him and spends his money while he works long hours. When he asks for a divorce to pursue the woman he loves, Marie turns him in. Newspaper headlines across the country debate his imprisonment, and he tells about the abuse in the chain gang system. Ultimately, he agrees to a deal that promises him a pardon in 90 days if he returns to the chain gang. He does so, but the governor declines the pardon, and Alan slowly becomes a hardened man. In the end, Alan escapes once more, destroying a bridge to secure his escape, a sad symbol of how far he has fallen from once building them. Constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every noise, we see Alan one final time as he dares to meet his old love Helen to say goodbye. She asks him how he can live on... hold on. I can't get emotional like this at the end. Hold on. She asks him how he can live on the run, to which he devastatingly replies, I steal. The prison system has successfully turned an honest man into a criminal. Jeff, what'd you think of this movie?
This one is quite high up for me. Honestly, when I was reading through all of them beforehand, this was one of the ones where I was like, okay, when I get to that one. So I did this one second to last because I was just kept putting it off and putting it off. I really liked the first half or so of this movie. And then there was a point where I was like, they yada yada over a lot of stuff in the middle to back half of the movie that made me go like, why do I care now? Because they haven't spent a lot of time developing certain things. I don't know enough about some of the other characters in the movie to really understand what's going on after that. The first hour is great, where he comes back from the war, and this is what we talked about with the last movie, is that he's a changed man. He doesn't want to follow rules anymore. He wants to make his own path. He wants to be independent. He got into engineering in the army, so he wants to build bridges and roads. And he's got these aspirations that his family is like, what are you talking about? You're going to go work in the factory. And he's going all over the place trying to make his way, and then he gets himself into this situation where he's in the chain gang. I did kind of question, like, where were your lawyers exactly? Because it was pretty obvious in the situation that, like, he was not part of the robbery. And the guy in the restaurant, I felt could have easily, if he'd been like testified, like, this dude was just as stuck as I was. Like, because he was very vocal about, like, what are you talking about? I'm not taking the money. And he pointed the gun at him and it was like, you do it or I'm going to shoot you. He kind of screwed himself by running out the back door, but he was like freaked out. I thought all the stuff with the chain gang was really compelling. There was a lot of interesting stuff. All the people we see speak for the most part are the white characters. And then they'll reference the minority characters that are involved. There's even like a separation. The black characters are on one truck. The white characters are on another truck when they travel, but then they're all working together. It's dealing with all this really, all these really important topics. All of that was fantastic. When I was watching this with Amy, my wife, she kept saying, oh, I like how there's a lot of traveling by map in this movie, like in Indiana Jones.
I thought that watching it, I was like, oh my God, Jeff is definitely going to make that, because that has to be, I don't know if this is the first time it's been done, but
yeah, there was a lot of cool visual stuff like that where like you can see how far he's going because they keep showing the map and he's moving around. But then also I really like the way they would show his pay stub to show us how he was moving up in the world, because he started out like making like a couple of dollars and then it gets to a point where it's like $19 a day.
There's just so many good pulp elements in this. The hat, the way he always had a hat is like an identity marker, like, whether it was nicer when he's doing better or worse. I love that. It did like the calendar pages coming off when he's in prison. That was really great.
Yeah, that too. Yep. I really liked all those little visual touches where they kept putting in stuff like that to really give us a sense of time's passing, things are getting better, because then you would see him and he'd be moving up. When he first escapes, he asks for a cheap hat, and then you can see later on he has more money, so his clothes are getting better. Everything is getting better as he rises up. But then he gets that first apartment. The woman is like $25 and he's like, that's a lot of money. And she's like, for you, I'll knock it down to 20. And you're like, okay, she's into him. It immediately cuts to he's studying, trying to get better at engineering. And she comes in and she's, you don't pay attention to me anymore. What happened? How long have they been together? At that point, everything started to sort of unravel for me. And it only would have taken, this movie's like 92 minutes, 2 short scenes of like, they're out on the town, everything's great. you know, and then just slowly show some kind of change. So I mean, and that's what I meant by like the yada yada over a lot of stuff in the back half of the movie. When you get to the point where he is negotiating what's going to happen to him, I immediately was like, if you take any deal from these people, you are a moron. He's so smart. And then suddenly he's just super trusting of the system, especially after he was throwing bombs about how terrible the chain gang was and how awful everybody was treated. And like he basically like threw down the gauntlet and was like, we are going at it here. I am fighting you tooth and nail. I don't know, that part of it really, I was like, man, you were smarter than this. And I didn't feel like there was enough there. I mean, and then the last 20 minutes are great. The final escape, everything with Bomber.
Bomber was great.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the end of the movie, like you said, it's very upsetting.
This is up in your top.
This is up there for me. I really did like this, but there was just enough to like throw me off and be like, oh man. I also would have liked more of a relationship developed with Helen. The one that he's actually, I would have liked a little bit more there too.
The women characters are definitely underwritten in this. And there's kind of that whole, the Madonna whore, like there's the bad woman and the good woman. And that's basically, those are their characters.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm very high on this movie. I really like this. I thought, in terms of being a takedown of chain gangs, which I knew really not very much about going in.
Yeah, me either.
And then reading afterward what it managed to do to the system, like changing the system. I loved the unflinching critique of our country's treatment of war heroes, about them coming back and being kind of immediately forgotten. Right. I loved the way it looked at poor people. Actually, I think honest in the way poor people are represented. Him not having enough money for a hamburger and being forced to walk the train tracks. Paul Mooney, I loved this actor. Absolutely loved him. I thought he was very sympathetic in that role. I liked him in Scarface. I talked about Scarface a lot last episode with Tony, and he played Scarface there. And I've read since, I've been reading up on him a little bit. Marlon Brando, this was his hero. He's not a method actor because they don't call him method. But like, let me read this little bit I saw on Wikipedia. To prepare for the role, Mooney conducted several intensive meetings with Robert E. Burns in Burbank to learn how Burns walked and talked. In essence, to catch the smell of fear. Mooney stated to Burns, "I don't want to imitate you. I want to be you." Mooney set the Warner Brothers research department on the quest to procure every available book and magazine article about the penal system. He met with several California prison guards, even one who had worked on the Southern chain gang. He wanted to meet a guard or a warden still working in Georgia, but the studio executives rejected his suggestion.
No, I agree with you. Mooney was outstanding. I mean, I know I said a lot there that wasn't good, but I really liked this movie. I just think that with that other stuff, it could have been great.
I forgive it a little only because I think that scene where he first breaks out, he stays with his buddy and he's like, you got to get me out of town to Chicago. And remember, he has like a prostitute or something going to his room. I felt like that scene was meant to show like how this good guy, this guy who was presented this good guy who wants to do good in the world, how the prison system and being on the lam, this was already turning him into a not so good guy. You know, it wasn't rehabilitating him, it was making him worse. So that choice, I think, to sleep with the prostitute, which I think he clearly does. It's a thrilling suspense film with moral outrage of the system designed to keep the regular Joe down. I really liked the way it compared the military, the factory job, the chain gang, and even his dream job were all similar. And that they required breaking out to improve your situation. Like in the case of his dream job, you had to show that he could do good and advance. And in the case of prison, he had to literally break out.
Right.
But they all required some type of sacrifice. And I guess in the dream job, it would be his time to spend with this other woman.
Well, that you're right, because even then, like that situation also seemed like something that he needed to break away from to really like finish the puzzle, right? I'm going on about, I think I'm being super hard on some of this stuff because I did like the rest of the movie much. And then they just kind of like
skipped on that one scene, Jeff.
Yeah, and I was just like, why did you do everything else so well?
The thing that hurts this movie to me is the title. I think I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. It sounds like a crappy 30s pulp book. Like, it doesn't sound like a movie you're going to think this is an Oscar winner or this is a Best Picture. I wrote all my little notes on my phone after I watched the movie because I'm like, I got it. Because I did it with Tony and I couldn't remember anything. about the movie. I'm like, I read the synopsis. I'm like, that's all I remember.
Yeah.
Hold on. This is what I wrote after watching the movie. The savagery of the guards reflect the true fantasies of upper management and their true feelings about working class people. Like the way, as soon as you have these people under you, you'll beat them, you'll whip them, or you'll torture them. And I feel like that is the world we live in. That's the way management thinks about the working class.
Right.
Cannot enter their world fairly, and the world we live in is not fair because of them. We have this is the Hollywood illusion, is that we can get into that world where we can be better, and the world he wants to get into, he can't get there. The world's not going to let him get there, because he wasn't born into it, because he wasn't, he wasn't privileged enough to get there.
Right.
So, and I liked all of those elements about it, and I did like the ending scene though, but I like the flair for melodrama. So him fading into black and just imagining she's never going to see him again.
Yeah.
And that look on his face, like, that's where I'm like, this actor, to me, like,
Yeah.
a different actor, this might have been a bad movie. Nailed it. He
really did carry it. He was quite compelling. But you talking about like the breaking through, like we didn't talk about the scene where he gets whipped. The first guy is in there and he is a crying puddle of mess as they're whipping the crap out of him. And then he goes in and he doesn't make a peep and they are beating him. There's the camera like pans through the room, showing all the guys almost coming together around him. They're not going to break this guy. And it's almost like inspiring them. Why would he trust these people for even a moment? He knows what they're capable of. The guy who was like, I'm going to take the beating and I'm not only not going to cry, I'm not going to make a sound. Yeah. I'm going to take everything you throw at me and I'm going to beat you. But for him to just be like, all right, I'll go back. They're going to let me go.
Yeah.
And I was just like, no, man, they're not going to let you go. You're better than this. What are you doing?
I think, Jeff, that's a classic case of...
But the phrase I use is moronic logic.
When you ask, why didn't he just go to the police? Or why...
Right, and maybe because it elicited that kind of reaction from me, maybe that's a positive point of the movie.
The movie is trying to do a bunch of things. I think it wants us to believe we can trust that the justice system is going to do the right thing. So, like, does it go against his character? I mean, I would have gotten it in writing. Okay, I'll do it for 60 days.
And I mean, Amy, I was like saying this to Amy, and she's like, well, it was the times, backroom handshakes, deals and stuff. And I'm like, but he knows these guys are bastards.
Let me ask, since you brought her up a couple times, did Amy like this? It sounded like she liked this movie maybe more than you did.
She really liked this. That stuff didn't bother her as much. I mean, well, she's not here or making a decision. I think if she was on the show, she probably would have picked this movie as number one. Yes.
Every month I make one of my friends or somebody watch all these old movies, but I've actually managed to make two people watch all these movies.
He watched, I think, like 8.5 of them with me, or 9.5 of them with me.
All right. Look, we're going to move off of this movie.
Yeah, let's go.
A Farewell to Arms, December 8th, 1932, directed by Frank Borzage. I actually saw this free on the Roku TV. So you paid for this from Amazon?
I did. I paid Amazon the fee.
Gave them your soul and some money. This was 88 minutes long. Starred actress Helen Hayes as Catherine Barkley and actor Gary Cooper as Lieutenant Frederick Henry. Also in this movie is Adolphe Menjou as Captain Rinaldi. This movie was nominated 4 times. Once for cinematography, it won. Once for sound recording, it won. Once for art direction, and once for Best Picture. Didn't win. Farewell to Arms is a 1932 American pre-code romance drama based on the 1929 semi-autobiographical novel A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. The film is about a tragic romantic love affair between an American ambulance driver and an English nurse in Italy during the Great War. Hemingway reportedly hates the adaptation, but became best friends with Gary Cooper after the movie came out. I need a drink of water. Oh, hold on, Jeff, take it. Give us the synopsis for this movie, please.
Love at first sight, World War I. 10 words or less.
10 words or less. On the Italian front during World War I, Lieutenant Frederick Henry is an American serving as an ambulance driver with the Italian army. His friend, Italian Captain Rinaldi, persuades Frederick to go on a double date with 2 English Red Cross nurses, Catherine Barkley, whom Rinaldi is interested in, and their friend Helen, Fergie Ferguson. He ends up getting with her, the nurse that Rinaldi likes. Before returning to the front, Frederick tells Catherine that what happened between them was important. Catherine gives him a St. Anthony medal she wears around her neck. Rinaldi observes this and jealously orchestrates her being transferred to Milan. At the front, Frederick is badly wounded by an artillery shell. He is sent to a hospital in Milan where Catherine rushes to his bed to embrace him. Later that night, an Italian army priest visits Frederick while Catherine is there. Seeing they are in love, he performs an unofficial wedding. Months later, Frederick is caught with alcohol stashed in his bunk and is told his convalescent leave is canceled. While waiting for his train, Catherine confides to Frederick that she is scared of each of them dying. He promises he will always come back and then kisses her before he leaves. Later, Catherine reveals to Fergie that she is pregnant and she is going to Switzerland to have the child. While apart, Catherine writes letters to Frederick while he writes to her. All of the letters are intercepted and returned by Rinaldi. Frederick is concerned for Catherine and deserts, going to Milan to find Catherine. In Milan, Rinaldi finds Frederick at a hotel and finally reveals that Catherine is going to have a baby and that she is in Brissago, apologizing for his part in keeping the lovers apart. While Frederick is rushing to see her, she goes into labor and is taken to a hospital. He arrives as she is wheeled into the operating room for a cesarean section. A surgeon tells Frederick the baby boy was stillborn. When Catherine regains consciousness, she and Frederick exchange endearments and plan their future. He tells her they can never really be parted. She tells him she is not afraid and dies as the sun rises. He picks up her body, turns to the window, sobbing, "Peace, peace. The war is over." Jeff, first, before I ask you about the movie, did you read this book? Have you ever?
No, I have not read this book.
Okay, I didn't know if, like, in high school, it was a class that you had to do or not. What'd you think of the movie?
I thought there was a lot of really good stuff in this movie. You know, like, I think this is another one of the few of the 10 that really felt cinematic. Again, another just like really fantastically staged like chase scene in the middle of the movie when he finally is just like, I'm out. And he runs, jumps in the water. They're shooting after him. There's explosions all over the place. This felt like a movie. It really moved. Each scene fed into the next scene. There was a little bit of the we fell in love, but it felt more like circumstantial, like it made sense because they were both in really weird emotional places, that they kind of became attached to one another. I saw the bit that Hemingway didn't like this movie, and it kind of seemed to me like he didn't like the movie because the movie went more towards that romantic angle, that he didn't mean for it to be like this romantic love story, that it was more like the circumstances led them into this terrible situation.
Actually, this is one where I actually read the book.
Oh, okay, cool. Go.
So,
tell me how wrong I am then.
No, you're not wrong. I think
Okay.
it's the war. The
Right.
war is the main character of the book. Like, it's this character experiencing the war. He meets this nurse, and sure, this love story happens. But the movie essentially cuts almost all the war stuff. And the most severe one that it cuts, in my opinion, is the where he deserts. Because in the book, he is leading this regiment on this impossible mission, and they all get blown away and killed. He has to kill some of his own men who are deserting, and he runs back. And when he runs back behind the lines to get back, the Italian army are shooting everyone they find, saying, "You deserted. You didn't fight till the death." So he has to desert to escape being killed as being a traitor. So then when he does desert, he goes to find Catherine. The movie cuts all of that and just makes it, he hears, "Oh, Catherine's not writing back to me. I'm out of here."
Right.
Which to me is very unpatriotic. Like, you join this war, you're fighting in it, and you haven't heard from your girlfriend, so you're gonna leave.
Yeah.
I think it makes his character in the book is much more interesting. He's this masculine man. He fights this war. He falls in love with this woman. And Gary Cooper definitely has that masculinity. But I think not focusing on the war, and this director, Frank Berzage, I don't like him. I've talked about him in the past as being he steals from other directors, kind of. He's a studio guy. We need it fast and we need it on time. Get Frank.
Yeah.
Although there are some interesting shot compositions I really like in this movie. But I think that is the thing Hemingway is responding to. And that's probably my problem with this movie too, is they boiled it down in the wrong direction.
I mean, it seemed to me like he wanted to desert right from the jump.
Yeah.
And that, like, it was all about her. And I kept thinking, like, don't you end up in jail when you do that? Aren't they going to be on the run for the rest of his, like, they can never be happy or together if he does this. I mean, what you're describing from the book makes way more sense that he was almost forced to do it.
Yeah.
Rather than making a choice.
And you're
You
safe
know,
in Switzerland. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You get to Switzerland, you're safe. They're not turning.
Yeah, you're right there. So this is the second of 3 movies now where our hero guy and our heroine meet when the woman is with another guy.
Oh yeah.
And then it just switches, he comes in, he's like, but in this movie it's worse because he's like, you're my best pal, but I'm gonna pull the bait and switch on you because I don't like the one that you set me up with.
Jeff, this is another situation where the book did someone dirt. The movie did someone from the book dirty because that guy, Captain Rinaldi, who likes her, and then ends up that Gary Cooper ends up hedging in and stealing her away from.
Yeah.
In the book, he is this fun, good friend. He's totally okay. Like he ends up just getting with another nurse. He's like, okay, you got the girl I liked.
Right.
And, like he's totally cool about it. This movie turns him into this villain who's constantly like he's not the one in the book sending her away, confiscating letters. They made him, I guess, to boil it all down again, like the bad guy of the and then at the end they want him to be the good guy again by being I always loved you. Good luck.
Well, his turn too is almost like, well, I didn't realize that you guys were really in love. I just thought it was like a fling, like, so I was like, they'll ruin one another. Like, but now that I know you're actually in love with her, then I'm sorry. And let's fix everything, even though it's my fault that everything is happening.
Yes.
Because if he had just let the letters go back and forth, maybe none of this happens. Because she's obviously broken up about everything. The implication is that she loses the baby because she's so kind of heartbroken about not getting the letters and not communicating with him. And she's done after that. She's in the hospital, she loses the baby. Like I said, there were things that I was like, oh, that's interesting. And like you said, there was a lot of like cinematic stuff that was really cool. That was done really well.
Yeah, that POV shot when he's like on the stretcher and they're bringing him into the hospital. Like I thought that was really interesting. Like unusual choice. I thought all the stuff with the dancers, like the sexy stuff, I was surprised that was in like this movie, that the code didn't get that wiped out, especially with Frank Versace directing. I actually wrote down like, wow, Frank, like, got that, because that whole scene where she's got her foot on his head and then it cuts to he's in an alley and he's got, maybe 1930s, they didn't know about foot fetishes yet. So
I was wondering if this is like a favorite of Tarantino's, honestly.
Oh, this has got to be up there for Tarantino. That scene alone. The cloying sentimentality and decision to focus the film on the romance, I thought it just kind of missed out the heart of what the novel was. And I also think this is the first movie that kind of glamorizes, in a way, World War One. It makes it seem like this romantic setting. It's all montage. The scene where it's like showing people walking away, the actual fighting, it's all done in this quick montage in one section of the movie.
Yeah.
There's no like him in the, trenches, or him like really in life and death battle situations, which he would have been. Or, even when he gets blown up in the bunker, it's kind of stagey, like, or something from another movie, like something from All Quiet on the Western Front. Just kind of looks like they just copied the set and, just shot it.
It's certainly possible that they did like, are you guys done? Because we want to use, like, is it okay if we use this part? Right. This wasn't one that I was like, okay, this is at the bottom, but it's not nearly something that I really enjoyed either. I mean, I liked both of them. I did kind of not like the end of it, where like he picks her up out of the bed and he's holding her, and he just is like, peace.
Yeah.
I was like, that's it? What?
This is actually to follow up with something you said really early on in the show. This is the first movie that was cut after the code. That whole foot scene at the beginning, that was all cut.
Okay.
Americans saw us over here. We got a happy ending where she doesn't die. And they also had an ambiguous ending where she could have died, depending on what you felt like.
Oh.
So they did a lot of tinkering with this movie after it initially came out. So this is a good example of like, well, what's the real version? If this version you and I watched was only there for like a year,
right,
and then it came back modern times,
they should edit it all together like Clue.
Put it
so
on.
You get all 3 endings.
You can see.
You have to decide which one.
They could, and then or do like the Netflix thing where hit this button to see the positive ending,
right?
This button to see that. How do you want? Do you want her to live or die?
Yeah, turn to page 10 if you want to.
I don't have a ton more to say on this, Jeff.
Yeah, I just didn't have a lot of thoughts on this other than what we've gone over. And I know it didn't sound very sophisticated. So
Yeah, I didn't have I thought Gregory Peck was fine. I totally see why Hemingway would, of
Cooper.
all the things, be like, I'm gonna be friends with him. He's a cool, tough dude.
Yeah. Gary Cooper.
Yeah, Gary Cooper.
You said Gregory Peck.
What did I say? I said Gregory Peck. Oh,
Yeah.
Gary Cooper. Sorry.
All right.
I don't know if Hemingway would have been friends with Gregory Peck. That's
No.
Kenny in the editing booth here with more pointless facts. Gregory Peck and Ernest Hemingway certainly knew each other, as Gregory Peck starred in 2 of Hemingway's film adaptations, The Maycomber Affair and The Snows of Kilimanjaro, the latter of which Hemingway reportedly told his pal Ava Gardner, there are only 2 things I like about that movie, your performance and the hyena's performance. Not a good look for Gregory Peck, so maybe they were not friends. Back to you, Kenny. All right. You ready for the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one. I'm glad you didn't really like that one very much either, because I was like, I don't know what to say about this one other than like I like the explosions.
Yeah, I liked it. It was a good. There were things I liked for sure, but I'm getting that point where I see the director's name and I'm just immediately okay.
Yeah.
This guy, Frank Berzage, did Bad Girl, which was, had a sexy poster of a girl and was not a sexy movie. Totally affected by the code. He also did another Seventh Heaven, another World War I movie. Again, I don't, the guy who directed Wings was in World War One, and I feel like a director who knows the material, that was a good movie. Frank Berzage wasn't in any of these wars, and I feel like these are the type of directors that are going to make movies that glamorize it, because they didn't go and come back broken from seeing, Jeff, we're going to talk about the movie you watched last night. Cavalcade, winner of the Academy Award at the 6th Academy Awards.
Yeah.
Came out April 15th, 1933, directed by Frank Lloyd. We both saw this on Amazon. This was like $3.50. This one was a little more expensive.
Yes. And it was the longest one.
Maybe that's why. Maybe they're charging by the minute for these old movies. 112 minutes was the length. Actress Diana Winward played Jane Marriott. I always do the actress first.
Sure.
Because I think it highlights how in these older movies the actresses didn't have great roles because they're never the leads, really.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important. Diana Winward as Jane Marriott, Clive Brooke as her husband, Robert Marriott, and Una O'Connor played Ellen Bridges. Did they have a black maid in this movie? No, it's not. Okay, cut all.
No, I believe the only characters of color in this film are the band at the very end of the movie.
Yes. Okay. And we are going to talk about that. But all right, Una O'Connor as Ellen Bridges was the housekeeper. There were the 2 families in this movie. There's the rich upper crust family, and then there's the family who is basically their servants.
Yes.
And Una O'Connor played the matriarch of that family. This movie was nominated 4 times. It won 3. It was nominated for actress Diana Winward. She did not win. It was nominated Best Picture. One nominated for directing. Frank Lloyd. 1 nominated for art direction. 1, and we should also point out, because you'll read this on any Wikipedia reviews, that when Frank Lloyd won, our lead actor from State Farm, who was not State Farm, State Fair, who was hosting the show, said, "Come on up and get your award, Frank." And both Frank Lloyd and Frank Capra went up, and Frank Capra humiliatingly had to walk back to his seat with his head down. When he was not the Frank that was called.
But there you go. That's your Moonlight moment.
Cavalcade is a 1933 American epic pre-code drama film based on the 1931 play of the same title by Noel Coward. The story presents a view of English life during the first third of the 20th century, from New Year's Eve 1899 to New Year's Day 1933, from the point of view of well-to-do London residents Jane and Robert Marriott, their children, their close friends, and their servants. Several historical events affect the lives of the characters as seen in its background for the film, including the Second Boer War, the death of Queen Victoria, the sinking of the Titanic, and World War I. Throughout the film, the passage of years is indicated by dates on title cards with a medieval cavalcade marching in the background. The film is one of the first to use the words damn and hell, as in hell of a lot. Those were words used in the play. There was concerns at the Hayes office this could set a precedent. Fox president Sidney Kent was quoted saying, "The mild profanity could not offend any person, and as far as the use creating a precedent, which might be followed by other producers, the best answer would be that anyone who could make a picture as good as Cavalcade would be justified in swearing in their movie."
Okay.
The film, this is according to Wikipedia. I read this on Wikipedia, and as we discuss our reviews, this might come up or might not. The film was reportedly Adolf Hitler's favorite film. During 1934, he and Joseph Goebbels, director of Nazi propaganda films, watched the film twice in March and May. I couldn't find a secondary source on that. I found other articles that said King Kong was his favorite movie and the most popular movies.
Okay.
There is reasons to believe, maybe this was his favorite movie, which we can get to. I'm going to try to not read the synopsis on this because I feel like I gave a general summary.
Yeah.
Let me just ask you, what did you think of Cavalcade?
I will give you. We're a half an hour into the movie last night.
Yeah.
I looked over at Amy and I said, "How are you feeling about this one?" And she said, "I hate it." I said, "All right, I'm kind of there." There's a scene on the beach where the older son, Edward, and his young lady friend are sitting on the beach, and she turns and looks out on the ocean and says, "Oh, look, a steamer." And I said, yes, it is.
Oh, the movie?
This movie is that very much. I really did not like this movie.
Is this your number 10?
I don't think it's the worst one. It does have that thing, that a lot of like Best Picture winners from the last 15 or 20 years have. This is the movie that gets nominated where everybody is like, what? But Hollywood is like, it's amazing. It's an achievement. And I'm like, but an achievement of what? The beginning is very slow. And you're just like I was trying to figure out like, what exactly is this movie about? Like, who is this movie about? It seems to be like the matriarch of the family is the main character, but she gets sidelined quite a bit. And it's about how she deals with all the terrible things that happened to her family and like how life keeps pulling everyone she loves away from her.
It's the story of a stay-at-home mom who learns about all the things that happen in the world outside of her apartment or house.
Right, exactly. Where she's at home, nothing's happening to her, everything's happening to everyone else, and she's just kind of there dealing with all the crap. Which, like, to an extent, could have been something that would be, an interesting comment on things. There's like she's stuck here, but it's not like she's trying to get out of it. She just wants to be in her house with all the money and all her family around and everything be wonderful, and still be friends with the lower class folks. But as soon as things get weird with them, they're gone. There's the class separation. There were points where the lower class family I felt was more compelling, but then suddenly the movie was just like, we're not going to deal with them anymore.
If you had ended this movie with the poor people's vision of the world as well as the rich people's, it would have been a better movie. This movie, as it is, the movie's message is a hope to make England great again, which people living now kind of can associate that feeling with something. And it's from the perspective of rich people wanting to remain right where they are.
Right.
And that montage at the end is probably, in all the movies I've seen, the most overly racist, bigoted, homophobic. They do a montage equating war, people fighting in war, with black people.
Yeah.
There's 2 gay men. There's 2 gay women. There's jazz music and young people enjoying themselves. And all of those are presented as evils of the modern world with war and all of these other horrible things. And the movie's trying to tell us we need to go back to the better times. Like, this is bad.
Right.
And I immediately was like, what did this movie just rope me into? This long trek through history just to be racist at the end.
You're introduced to the 2 families in the house. The lower class family is initially their servants. But then after the first war that they're involved with is over, they're going to go out and make their own way in the world. He's a business owner. They're going to do their own thing. And that ends up like being his downfall because he becomes a drunk. But it's still working. And like the most interesting thing that happens in the movie is he dies. Is that this woman, she loses her husband. She takes control of the business and turns it into a success and keeps it going. And puts her daughter through dance school. And she becomes this great singer and dancer and everything. But that's just like completely swept under the rug. The worst thing that happens in this movie to me is that's her sister, right?
Margaret Harris. I don't think she was a sister. I think she was just a close friend.
Her daughter marries Edward, the eldest son. Edward and her drown on the Titanic in the middle of the movie, which I actually thought was hilarious. No one ever mentions her again for the rest of the movie. Her mother never references that she lost her child.
I thought, Jeff, that cutaway belonged in the Naked Gun movie or a comedy movie where they're having this romantic moment looking out at the sea. They get the sun over them and they're like saying all these, "Oh, I love you." And then they walk away and you see that life preserver and it says Titanic across. Like, I was just like, no, what happened? The instant comedy of that. And I was debating this with Jessa, and maybe you can answer this question. Executive producer Jessa Goldstein.
Yes.
I was talking about that would be like in a modern movie if your kids got married and they were like, what could happen horrible to us? Who knows what tomorrow will bring? And then you pan back and see them standing on the top of the World Trade Center buildings.
I had that exact conversation with Amy during breakfast this morning.
Like, I don't think that works at any time in history. It's the same time frame because 9/11 was about 20 years before this, and Titanic is about 20 years before this movie came out. So they're the same.
Right. They would have been like the children of characters who fought in the Gulf War, and then they die in the World Trade Center bombing.
Yeah.
And what happened? They're on the top floor of Tower 1. They're talking about, we're doing so great. We're making so much money. Well, I'd be so happy if we died today. It just pulls back, and they're in the towers.
Yeah,
and then you
maybe
cut
a
to another
newspaper
scene.
flashes up saying September 11th, 2001.
Yeah. When did you realize that they were on the Titanic?
Right then, when the life preserver came, and even afterwards, I was like, "Wait, are they about to die?" Like, Jeff, I hope you didn't just put a bad idea into some Hollywood executive's head to remake this movie now using the modern timeline. Because I'm thinking about it now, I'm like, you totally could do that. Cavalcade 2,
a new picture for a new generation.
I think this movie fails the poor family, and I feel like
Totally.
Hollywood revealing themselves, like showing that this poor family suffers through the same stuff that the rich family suffers through.
Yeah.
But they don't have that melancholy. Like, they're not sad about it. They're just like, when the dad dies, they just move on. They get the business. The daughter's actually happy because he was kind of a bully from the drinking.
Yeah.
And like, they're doing better, but it's like this movie wants to say, actually, they need to know their place. They should have stayed servants.
Yeah.
By getting their own business, he became a drunk. He, ran the thing bad. It made their daughter become wild and dance in the streets and become like an artist, which is presented as bad in this movie.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, their two sons are blissfully idiots. Like, that one is just, I'm so happy. It's like fighting war. He's drinking with his two buddies at the table. Like, oh,
he just kept saying, "Isn't it marvelous? We're going to war."
Like, dumb is like, and these are the kids with presumably good educations. Maybe it's because the parenting, and I said this at the beginning of the movie, the parenting was bad when it's New Year's and the mom's like, "No, you kids have to go to bed." And then the dad's like, "What if I wake them up and bring them downstairs?" Like, right off the bat, parents not on the same page. And
what does she say to him when he comes up, the older boy he's at the top of the stairs, and the mom goes up and she's like, "Edward, you awful boy. What if I spanked the hell out of you?"
Oh, yeah. What if this movie, and this was tough for me, Jeff, because I've mentioned in previous episodes, I love New Year's in movies. And this movie played Old Lang Syne like 5 times. I'm like, you're killing me. I want to love this movie. But it was just, once you don't realize, that's the thing. I didn't realize until the end how bad a message this movie was going to be. Like, I'm like, I felt like jumping through time makes it impossible to become sympathetic with these characters because we're not
absolutely
invested in them. It's like, by the time you're like, okay, they're on the Titanic. Well, no, now it's 5 years later and they're dead.
Right.
And here's some new characters to care about.
Yeah. And they did, like, there was a point where it skipped a bunch of years, and I didn't even realize that we were kind of at the point in the movie where we're dealing with the Depression. Yeah. So there's the scene where the World War ends and the younger kid is dead. And then it skips like a decade.
Yeah.
And they're old and it's the end and they're drinking. There's the shot with the montage is just like the two of them turn and almost break the fourth wall. as if they're addressing the audience with their toast.
She does it multiple times in the movie, Jeff. She'll
Yeah.
look into the camera right after saying something. I'm like, is she a bad actor, or are they telling her like you're the connection to the audience? Like, 'cause she
Yeah.
does it like 3 times in the movie. Dead looks in the camera and she
Right.
nominated Best Actress. I thought she was terrible.
I mean, I've had just about enough of this movie, but
Yeah.
another movie where there's a sort of a we fall in love right away scene where the guy is just so douchey and creepy and awful. He's like, oh, I know her. I'm gonna go surprise her. And he's in the room and he stands there and watches her get undressed.
So
and at
cringe.
first he's like, ooh, cool. And then he's like, oh, wait, this is going on too long. This is uncomfortable. I'm gonna try to get out of here. But he's like leering at her, and then she's like, were you in here the whole time? And he's like, yeah, but we're old friends, so it's cool. And at first she's like, I don't know who you are. And it's like, oh, wait, you're that guy.
And
Let's go to the roof and watch Britain explode.
Yeah, they did that character dirty by having her fall in love with the idiot son.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
she wisely didn't marry him. So that was a good.
Right. Yeah.
And I liked Clive Owen,
Gump.
that actor playing the dad in Shanghai Express. Like, I thought he was good. Well, I mean, he's kind of is playing the same character in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, his character had nothing to do in Cavalcade. He was just the stoic, stiff upper lip dad who,
Right.
well, I'm off to war. Well, I'm back from war. Well, I'm off. Hey, son, good to see you at war.
Yeah.
I'll never see you again.
Right.
I
Thanks
put,
for stopping by, kid.
I put the Hollywood fantasy is alive here. Rich characters that don't work and talk often about everlasting love and a cynical look at the working class people and their ultimate value to society. They are eroding the moral fabric. I still love New Year's in film, but this movie spends too much time worrying about that last year was better and not enough time hoping the next year will be worth living in. And that, my friends, is I love New Year's because we're thinking next year's going to be better. We're not sitting here thinking, oh, it was better before. All these people, it was better before. It was not better before. Right. It was never better before. Cavalcade. That's my number 9 movie.
Okay. Fair enough.
The only reason that beat Smiling Through is because Smiling Through falls into that category of movies for me that I just don't think about at all. Like, it's like I watched it and it's kind of gone. And like,
yeah. No, I think a Cavalcade might actually be my number 10 now that we're really thinking about it.
All right, Jeff, are you ready to move on?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. State Fair came out February 10th, 1933, directed by Henry King. We both watched this on Amazon. This was a $3.99 rental. Length, 97 minutes. Starring actress Janet Gaynor as Mary Frake, actor Will Rogers, who was the host of this Oscars, as Abel Frake, the father, actress Louis Dressler as Melissa Drake, and actress Sally Ellers as Emily Joyce. Lou Ayres played Pat Gilbert. Dyke of Rosedale played Blue Boy, the pig. And Norman Foster played Wayne Drake. Otherwise, I put all the names in on this one. I felt like it was a small cast. We might be coming back to them later, so let me just have them ready. This was nominated twice, one for Best Picture and one for Writing, and it won neither. State Fair is an American pre-code comedy drama film. Picture tells the story of a farm family's multi-day trip to the Iowa State Fair. Based on the best-selling 1932 novel by Phil Strong, this was the first of 3 versions of the novel released to theaters. State Fair had been made a year before the institution of strict production code enforcement in 1934. Although the writers had cut the novel's depiction of a sexual affair between the daughter and the reporter, they kept the son's seduction by the trapeze artist. Moralists were particularly outraged by a scene in which Foster and Eiler's dialogue is heard off-screen while the camera reveals a rumpled bed and a negligee on the floor. Making the scene especially offensive was its inclusion in the film starring Will Rogers, whose star image usually guaranteed unobjectionable films. When Fox reissued State Fair, that scene had been cut and it's never been restored, so we didn't see that scene in the movie. Synopsis. The Drake family are getting ready for the Iowa State Fair, but what comes but once per year. Abel Drake is preparing and pampering Blue Boy, his oversized hog that he hopes will win big in competition. His buddy, the storekeeper, bets him $5 that even if Blue wins, something bad will happen. Abel takes that bet. His wife, Melissa, has dreams of winning big too, as she is preparing a selection of pickles and mincemeat to enter into competition. Their children, Margie and Wayne, are coming along for the ride. and each leaving a potential romantic interest back at the farm, though neither seem too excited about their prospects. And we're off to the fair. The film treats us all like spectators, an active audience, walking us through all 3 days of a celebration packed with people, amusement park rides, sideshow attractions, carnival barkers, games, and contests. Wayne meets Emily, a trapeze artist that seduces him. Margie meets Pat, a newspaper man that seduces her. And things are looking up for the Frake family. After a dramatic taste testing, Melissa wins all 5 categories she enters in. After a dramatic horse and carriage race, the horse Margie and Pat are rooting for wins. Romantically, things are heating up. Emily brings Wayne back to her place and sleeps with him, but lets him down by telling him it was just a weekend fling. Pat brings Margie back to his place and tries to sleep with her, but she tells him it was just a weekend fling and has to take her home. But now it's Blue Boy's turn. Will he win? He does! Wow! Can things get any better? The Drake family returns home and Abel asks the storekeeper for that $5 he owes him. But the storekeeper is skeptical. Is Margie sad? Hold that thought. There's a phone call. It's Pat. He loves her and he's in town. Margie runs through the rain with abandon to meet him, and it's romantic as all get out. What a great time at the fair. The end. How about
Okay.
What do you think of this one, Jeff?
I think you didn't like this movie.
But you tell me, what did you think about this movie?
This was the first one I watched, and there was like trying to get into that 30s mindset. Like I was expecting things to happen, and I ended up thinking like, well, if this movie was made today, how would these things play out? You know, there's the kind of hilarity with Will Rogers tells his wife, you got to put some whiskey in the meat. You know, that's how you do it, right? So she's like, nah, we're not going to do that. And then he puts some in when she's not looking. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. And then later he leaves and she comes into the room and she's like, yeah, I think he's right. So she puts more in and I'm like, all right, we're going to get a scene where all the judges are drunk.
Yeah.
And everything's fun. We're going to get this hilarity, this madcap competition, you know, and that doesn't happen. There's like one scene where one of the judges is like, oh, that one's really good. And then later on, there's a newspaper article written by our hero boy, who is extremely, let's say, problematic at times. He writes that something happened to one of the judges, like he got sick or something, you know, and I'm like, that should have been on screen. Also, so our hero Blue Boy, who's really the hero of the film, he gets to the fair and he's like really bummed out. He's laying down. He doesn't want to get up. He's like not interested in competing. Will thinks he's sick or something. He's like, come on, Blue Boy. So a lady pig shows up and suddenly he's like, whoa, you know, he stands up and there's like several conversations in pig language between Blue Boy and the lady pig. There's literally like 3 scenes where the pigs talk to one another and they're just going, this is the movie. We're watching these pigs talk to one another. The end of the movie, he wins. The other pig that made it to the finals and Blue Boy are fighting as if the other pig realizes that he lost and he needs to take down Blue Boy. I thought like, that's not the 2 pigs that should be in that scene together.
You wanted to see some pig.
I think
romance.
Let's keep it nice and PG here. I would have preferred for Blue Boy to get his lady at the end of the movie. And I just thought, like, if this is made today, say by the Farrelly brothers.
Oh, sure.
That scene is those pigs getting together and finding true love. And that's how the movie ends.
Yeah, they're getting their awards or something. Will Rogers is getting the award, and then they hear oinking, and they're like, oh, Blue Boy! And then Blue Boy's over there with the lady pig.
Exactly. Yes, that's where that scene should have gone. Because we don't see the lady pig again, you know, after that. Because it really didn't make sense to me why the 2 male pigs were like fighting. But
I didn't think about it till you're saying this now, but I think you're totally right. They missed their pig ending with that. Or they could have at least shown that the other pig maybe had designs on the lady pig, and maybe there was some kind of a 3 pig
there you go.
sort of action.
There could have been, yes.
Yeah, those pigs didn't need to fight. They were. I like this movie. I'm going to tell you straight.
Okay,
up. I did like this movie. This is in my. It just made the recommend list.
Really? Okay.
It's not on the total outs. It had the Old Lang Syne in it. They played the New Year song, and I liked it. It was delightful. I thought Janet Gaynor, the actress playing the daughter, I love her as an actress.
I liked her a lot. Yeah,
she was really good. I thought the dad, Will Rogers, was really good too. He was a enjoyable watch. it's refreshing to watch a movie where positivity wins out. Like
Sure.
the film on the surface, it's simple. It's a tight-knit family of farmers spending a weekend camping at the state fair, but it gets into the deeper issues about happiness, living in the moment, all while providing this fascinating snapshot of a bygone American institution and letting the audience experience the sights and sounds of the state fair. And I quoted, there's one quote that I actually got a little teary at that Janet Gaynor gives. Yeah, she's out with the problematic boyfriend in the woods, and I think she might be breaking up with him or something. And he's talking about we'll see each other again, and she says something like, "There's a first time for everything, and you never can get it back just the same ever again." And I was like, that's such a poignant moment because this whole movie is about this live in the moment. The state fair, it's here for a second.
Right.
All these relationships starting, you're winning these prizes,
Yep.
and it's this very self-reflective moment of like, yeah, this is here and it's great. Things won't always be great.
Right.
And I really liked the simplicity of that sentiment. It's like, okay, this is a good, positive, fun movie. There's no real drama to it. There's just they win everything. But I thought it was sweet, like in a Little House on the Prairie way, where they can take a simple story and kind of give you this larger message without beating it over your head. You know? And I liked that about this movie. When I was younger, I wouldn't have liked this movie. I would.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah. This is older Kenny.
You're succumbing to the sentimentality, yearning for your youth and like sweet, young, innocent love and falling in love at summer camp.
Yeah, and sneaking away. And I liked how the parents were like more realistic. Like the scene at the end where the farmer and his wife are walking through the fair and they see the sexy lady girls. And he's like, I don't really want to go in there, but if you do, I'll go in with you. You know, if you want to go see him. And then she does, and she's like, "Yeah, well, all right, let's go." I was like, I love that.
I really like them as like an older couple. I did like a lot of this movie. I think I had told you it was one of my bottom 3, but I kind of feel like that's not really the way I felt about it. I did enjoy watching it. Amy hated it.
You think it's grown on you, like thinking about it? Like
I think I even liked it in the moment, but like the more she was like, I hated that movie, I was like, yeah, that was the worst one. Like the thing in this movie, like in several of the movies we've talked about, is the relationship that we're shown the most is the one that we should have seen the least of, and that the one we saw the least of was much more interesting to me. Sally Eilers, who plays the trapeze.
Oh, she's a star. She was the star of the movie Bad Girl, and I loved her in that. She was really good here.
Yeah, I thought she was great, and that relationship was more interesting to me because you could tell that it was destined to fall apart. You know, you can tell like this stupid farm kid, you know, is falling for this interesting, exciting woman, and she's just here to have some fun with this kid. The best scene to me in the movie was the scene when he pulls one over on the bottle guy. When he's raining and he gets his money back and he tells him the story. And that's when she like swoops into the movie and like she pretends that her dad's like the police chief or whatever.
Both guys buy it.
Yeah, she basically talks the guy into giving the kid his money back that he lost the year before because he'd been, you know, bamboozled by the carnival fair guy. I love that scene, the way that she just kind of comes in and like, you know, tough talks her way through everything and just completely this is a scene where you could buy a young innocent dude just completely being infatuated with somebody. And she's beautiful, she's like compelling, she's like comes in, and I was just like
star actress of a show.
And then they meet afterwards, and then you have like 2 other scenes with them. But we have to sit through half the movie with Janet Gaynor, who Janet Gaynor won the first like Best Actress Oscar, right?
Yeah, and she was fantastic in Sunrise. She actually she was nominated for 3 movies in that first one. Because back then, if you were in, you just got nominated for all the movies you were in.
Yeah, I liked her a lot when they were on the farm. I thought she was great. And then when you get to the state fair and she falls for this guy who's really, again, just kind of a not great guy.
Jeff, you know? I chalked that up to this actor, Lou Ayres. Me and Gavin did not like him. What was it in the war movie we did, All Quiet on the Western Front?
Okay.
I was like, if they had cast a better actor, that movie would have been a lot better. This kid is so wooden. Yeah. Like I get nothing out of him. And this movie did nothing to change my opinion about him. I think he was just like a wooden plank.
Yeah.
And I think Janet Gaynor had a hard time like creating that chemistry with him. It's just like, here's just some dude.
Like, I guess he's supposed to be super charming, and that's why she's falling for him, because he's this big city writer guy and he's saying all the right things. But I kept thinking, like, what he's saying is really lame. And then later on in the movie, when they're walking around, he's really manhandling her.
And him taking her back to the hotel or wherever he took her, like, I know the movie cuts that they actually did anything. How trashy is this dude to be like, I just met this farm girl. Let's go back to my hotel. If they had slept together, that would have been a more complicated feeling. But maybe it would have been more realistic. I don't know.
You know, like you said in the synopsis, she is the one. In both situations, it's the woman who says, you know, no, this is just a fling. We're done.
I think the movie wants us to want her to be with that guy, but I really think both you and I probably responding negatively to it is because the actor is not. I feel like a better actor, even delivering the same lines, and maybe being a little less handsy with her, would have been like, okay, yeah, I like this guy. Maybe she should be with him.
You're probably right. You know,
Tony would suggest Maurice Chevalier. Like, he would have probably been everyone at the state fair would have been in trouble. Their wives with him there.
I did like this movie, you know, to an extent.
I love the family unit. I love this. This family felt like a real family to me.
Absolutely.
They were allowed to wander around the fair. Like at first he's like, oh, you can't go unaccompanied. And then like immediately they're like, no, that's fine. You can go.
Yeah.
Like, that's a real family to me. You know?
I loved all the stuff on the farm. Like before they went to the state fair, I really felt like they were, like you said, like they were a family. Like these two kids came from these two adults. And yeah, the scene where when Mary comes in and finds him practicing and he's like so into it, she treats him like a sister. She kind of chides him about it a little bit, but she gets it and she's like all for it. You know, and they kind of tease one another. And it really, you're right. They really do feel like an actual family, you know, and as opposed to the family we saw in the last movie we talked about, where I don't, none
terrible
of them
family.
like, yeah.
Terrible. Jeff, I also think this movie I read a note, it had a couple of those editing problems like we talked about where things jumped. But overall, I felt like the cinematography of this movie was so good. Like the shots of them on the truck driving where you see just cornfields and the sky. I was like, I wrote down, you can smell the farm. Like I felt like just from watching that movie, like I felt there, you know. A Frank Berzage would have cut that, you know, he wouldn't have left that long scene of her sitting in the back of a truck.
Right.
I appreciated that about this movie. So this movie I'm a little higher on. You ready to move on?
Absolutely.
All right, let me take a quick sip of water. I don't want my throat to die.
Yeah, this one's gonna be quick.
This one will be. It was a quick movie. She Done Him Wrong. January 27th, 1933, directed by Lowell Sherman. I saw this on the Criterion Channel, which I recommend all of our viewers and listeners get. Criterion Channel app on their phone. I believe it's like $100 a year or $10 a month, something along those lines. You can watch lots of great movies on there. This one I didn't even realize they had because it's not on their DVD list or anything, but they had it streaming on the channel. And generally, if it's on Criterion, it's going to be in great condition. But I'm assuming it was also on Amazon, right, Jeff? Because you said all of these.
Yes, I got this on Amazon.
So this was 66 minutes, the shortest of the movies we did. We got actress Mae West playing Lou. We got Cary Grant as, I wrote Cat Cummings. That cat.
Yes.
His name was Cat?
His last name is Cummings. I know that because I was reading a little bit about this before.
Captain. I meant to write Captain. I wrote
Captain.
All right.
Well, we don't know that until the end of the movie, though.
That's right. So we'll just say Cary Grant as Cummings, and actress Louise Beavers as Pearl. Louise Beavers is the one I wrote in there. And let me just do a quick side tangent. Louise Beavers was the only African-American actress to be brought aboard the film by West personally. She wanted a black woman to appear opposite her when she did stage and screen work. West made it a point to act with black American actors and actresses, hoping to break racial discrimination in entertainment. West's stage shows resulted in her arrest for saucy material, and her having black actors on stage was extremely controversial. With this film, she and her Paramount bosses called the shots. Black stars appeared in a few of her films after this one. This character is not the best. We don't see an inner life to this character. She's just basically playing a servant. But when I read that thing about Mae West, and you think about the inherent racism of the studios, that they don't even want black actors appearing in these
Right.
movies. And just them showing up is a controversial problem. You got to give Mae West credit for fighting for this role.
I think she got as much as she could get.
Yeah. They weren't going to let her have a role with like an arc, you know.
Right.
I usually, if there's minority characters in some of these early movies, I like to highlight them just because it is sadly so rare, especially in speaking roles. All right. This movie was nominated once for Best Picture. That's it. She Done Him Wrong is a 1933 pre-code American crime comedy film. The plot includes melodramatic and musical elements. It was adapted from a successful 1928 Broadway play, Diamond Lil, written by Mae West. The film is famous for West's many double entendres and quips, including her best known, "Why don't you come up and see me sometime?" Did I do that right?
Sure.
The West does not actually say this line in the film. She actually says something like, why don't you come up sometime and see me?
Yeah, she reverses the line. And I read that like she uses that line again and again. It's like her like 007's like, shaken, not stirred. That's like her thing.
Let me stop right here, Jeff, and ask,
it.
Where did you hear it? I heard that line before this movie, and I don't know where.
It's just like one of those things that got into the zeitgeist that you hear a million times and you have no idea where it came from, unless you're a big Mae West fan.
I was thinking, like, did Miss Piggy ever say that? In like
probably does. I would bet that Miss Piggy says that at some point in time over the course of the Muppets.
I feel like Miss Piggy, I'm on a way tangent. We got to get back to this. But I feel like Miss Piggy she owes a lot to Mae West.
I would not be surprised if Mae West was a large influence in the creation of Miss Piggy's character.
Yeah. The Hays Code, our enemy, the Hays Code, declared the play Diamond Lil banned from the screen and repeatedly demanded changes to remove associations with or elements from the play, including titles with the word diamond. The adaptation was finally allowed under the condition that the play is never mentioned or referred to in publicity or advertising. West was one of the most controversial movie stars of her day. She encountered problems, especially with censorship. She once quipped, "I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it." She bucked the studio system by making comedy out of conventional beliefs, and the Depression-era audience admired her for it. Let me hit the synopsis on this movie. It's New York City in the gay 1890s. Lady Lou works in the Bowery Barroom Saloon. Throughout the film, we meet men that'll fall in love with her and do anything for her. One such man is her current boss and benefactor, Gus Jordan, who pays for her love with many, many diamonds. What she does not know is that Gus traffics in prostitution and runs a counterfeiting ring to help finance those expensive diamonds. He also sends young women to San Francisco to be trained as pickpockets. Gus works with two other crooked entertainer assistants, Russian Rita and Rita's lover, the suave Sergei, thank you, Steniev, who also falls for Lou. Another man in love with Lou is one of Gus's rivals, Dan Flynn. He spends most of the movie dropping hints to Lou that Gus is up to no good, promising to look after her once Gus is in jail. Lou leads him on, but eventually loses patience and implies he'll see her in jail if she doesn't submit to him. Lou's former boyfriend, Chick Clark, is a vicious criminal who was convicted of robbery and sent to prison for trying to steal diamonds for her. In his absence, she becomes attracted to a handsome young psalm singer reformer. The man she wants to come upstairs and see her is Captain Cummings, the upright director of the city mission located next door to the bar. Cummings is in reality an undercover federal agent working to infiltrate and expose the illegal activities in the bar. In the end, Gus Jordan gets arrested, Russian Rita gets murdered, Suave Sergei gets arrested, Stan Flynn gets murdered, Chick Clark gets arrested, and Captain Cummings is revealed to be the Hawk. Cummings takes Lou away in an open horse-drawn carriage instead of the paddy wagon into which all the other criminals are loaded. He tells her she doesn't belong in jail and removes all her other rings and slips a diamond engagement ring onto her finger. They presumably smash together right after the credits roll. What'd you think of this movie, Jeff?
I had trouble watching this movie. Like Mae West, she was great. I mean, she not only did she like try to really get a lot of like minority characters in her movies and her stage plays and everything. She did a ton of work for homosexual individuals as well. She was really like a champion for minority actors, actresses, and stories. But this movie, I just did not care for. I was really having a hard time. She sounded like every single line of dialogue was meant to be some sort of a punchline. Like
some of them were great though, Jeff.
Some of them were great. Some of them she would land. Yeah, I had a lot of trouble with this one.
I have very little on this. I got basically it's a sizzle reel for Mae West. She's not wrong, lets her vamp, crooning some of the best pre-code dialogue as she navigates the many men that fall in love with her. The plot is thin, the character's thinner. To me, West stole every scene she was in. Cary Grant a second billing, but he barely registered to me at all. This was Mae West movie. I did enjoy her. I wrote a couple of her lines down that I really liked. Like one, ain't you ever met a man that could make you happy? Sure, lots of times. I wish he'd forget me, but the guy's a memory expert. And then I wrote, why don't you come up and see me sometime and see me?
Yes.
I just think you're right. She has a lot of these one-liners, and that's basically the whole movie.
Which makes sense because she wrote the movie.
Yeah.
She wrote it for herself. I'm going to get all the best lines. Every guy in the movie is going to want me. I couldn't get into it. Her voice was driving me nuts. Amy didn't really like this either.
I think if Mae West is driving you nuts and she done him wrong, then this movie, you are not going to like it because this movie is Mae West, period. It is not really a movie. There's so much stuff going on, but you're not watching it for any of that. You know, you're either interested in her, and she's a fascinating character because I didn't find her super sexy. Like, I wasn't like, I got to go see her sometime. I think
it was the shortest movie, and while I was watching it, it felt like it went on forever.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the same thing over and over. The only thing I thought that made me look something up afterwards was when they send that girl, they're like, hey, have you ever heard of the Bowery? And the girl's like, no. And she smiles and it's like, okay, well, you're going there.
Yeah.
Like, so I looked that up because I'm like, well, maybe someone at the time would know what that means. The Bowery is the oldest street in Manhattan. It was one of America's first avenues with streetcars, trains, and electricity, which led to a very active nightlife. In the 1890s, it was a center for prostitution and gained a national reputation as a Skid Row and Thieves' Highway. So, which is weird because the movie also tells us that they're sending her to be trained as a pickpocket in the Bible.
Right. So I think they're trying to get around, like they didn't want to outright say that this girl's being shipped off
to be a prostitute,
trafficked basically. And I think they wanted to kind of have everything without really showing us anything.
Mae West had to pick her battles probably, and they were probably on the phone constantly being like, that's gonna go, what are you doing? And she's like, no.
Absolutely. You know, the more you read, that's why I was spending so much time earlier, because I was like, I don't like the movie, but I want to say a lot of positive things about her because she really just seemed like she was an amazing woman for that time and accomplished things that you wouldn't think that any woman would have been able to do, given it was their 30s, you know, and it's just the way it was. But like, it seems like the stage work that she did, and she was kind of a genius marketer. There was a point where she got in trouble for one of her plays and she was convicted for like violating some moral rules or something. And she could have gotten out of it, but she chose to go to jail because she knew that her going to jail would get more attention on what was going on. So she went to jail, and it says like that she was even like dining with the warden and his wife because she was so like had so much power and was such an iconic individual at the time that like everyone was captivated by her as a person. I wish that I had gotten from the movie the Mae West that seemed to have existed in the real world.
Yeah.
You know, where like everybody seemed to have been captivated by her, and I just wasn't.
Yeah, I'm thinking on this too. She's probably a prototype Marilyn Monroe. There's probably not a lot of these types of characters. Women aren't going to get these type of parts for that section between here and when Monroe kind of bursts on the stage. So I do, again, you know, it's sad watching the Mae West era is probably going to be ending soon. But I appreciated this movie. I like you though. I can't really recommend it just on its own.
Yeah.
Let's move on. We've been on this one too long, I think. 42nd Street, March 9th, 1933, directed by Lloyd Bacon. This was $3 on Amazon. I'm assuming you also paid for it there.
I did.
Length, 89 minutes, starring Ruby Keeler as Peggy Sawyer, Warner Baxter as Julian Marsh, and Bebe Daniels as Dorothy Brock. This was nominated twice, once for Best Picture, once for Sound Recording, won neither. 42nd Street's a 1933 American pre-code musical film adapted from the 1932 novel of the same name by Bradford Ropes. Film revolved around the rehearsal for a Broadway show at the height of the Great Depression and its cast and crew. The film was choreographed by Busby Berkeley with music by Harry Warden and lyrics by Al Dubin. Busby Berkeley, to us people who listen to Golden Boy, will remember Rob talking about how great Berkeley's choreography was in episode 2. Quick background on Busby Berkeley. American film director and musical choreographer, he devised elaborate musical production numbers that often involve complex geometric patterns. Berkeley's work used large numbers of showgirls and props as fantasy elements in kaleidoscopic on-screen performances. He had 3 films in 1933, Gold Diggers of 1933, 42nd Street, and Footlight Parade. So basically this movie has 2 directors. We got our Lloyd Bacon, who did the bulk of this movie, and Busby Berkeley, who did all those dancing scenes, which are basically the last 20 minutes of the movie. Synopsis. It's 1932, the depths of the Great Depression, and noted Broadway producers Jones and Barry are putting on Pretty Lady, a musical starring Dorothy Brock. Dorothy owes her big break to wealthy and disgusting Abner Dillon, the show's angel, who only asks for a romantic relationship in return. But she is secretly seeing her old vaudeville partner, out of work Pat Denning, on the sly, and that could spell trouble later. Julian Marsh is hired to direct, although his doctor warns him he risks his life if he continues in his high-pressure profession. Despite a long string of successes, he's impoverished, a result of the 1929 stock market crash, so he must make his last show a hit in order to have enough money to retire. Cast selection and rehearsals begin amidst fierce competition and with not a few casting couch innuendos flying around. Naive newcomer Peggy Sawyer, who arrives in New York from her home in Allentown, Pennsylvania, is duped and ignored until 2 experienced chorus girls, Lorraine Fleming and Anytime Annie Lowell, take her under their wing. She's assured of the job because of a relationship with dance director Andy Lee, who also sees to it that Anne and Peggy are chosen. The show's juvenile lead, Billy Lawler, takes an immediate liking to Peggy after her busting into his dressing room. When Marsh learns about Dorothy's relationship with Pat, he sends some thugs to rush him up. Dorothy and Pat agree not to see each other for a while anyway, and he gets a stock job in Philadelphia. Rehearsals continue for 5 weeks, to Marsh's complete dissatisfaction, until the night before the show's surprise opening in Philadelphia, where Dorothy breaks her ankle. By the next morning, and after a last-minute intervention by Anytime Annie, Peggy gets the chance to fill in as the lead. So the girl who went from nothing, who'd never been in the show, becomes the lead of the show. That's the gist of this movie.
Basically, yeah. 200
jobs in the future, writing in the outcome. A desperate Julian rehearses Peggy mercilessly until an hour before the premiere, vowing, I'll either have a live leading lady or a dead chorus girl. The last 20 minutes of the film are devoted to 3 Busby Berkeley production numbers: Shuffle Off to Buffalo, I'm Young and Healthy, and 42nd Street. The show is a hit. The theater audience comes out. Julian stands in the shadows outside the stage door, hearing comments that Peggy is the star and that he, the director, doesn't deserve the credit to the show's success. All right, Jeff, what'd you think?
I remember really enjoying the first hour of this movie. And then the musical starts, and I thought, all right, we're going to get to see a little bit of the show. And then it kept going and going and going. And suddenly it dawned on me that they're going to show us the whole musical now, aren't they? And I don't like musicals. And it just completely ripped me out of the whole thing. It was just such a jarring change. There was a lot of stuff going on, like around the show and with the characters. And then suddenly we're just watching the musical. And then it ended. And I thought, okay, we'll get a little bit of something. But all we get is, like you said, the people coming out saying, oh, it was great. The girl was awesome. But the director doesn't really deserve a lot of credit. So he's just alone in the alley, and then it ends. He wasn't really the main character, but we're kind of left with him at the end. The other thing that really bugged me was that the girl, you know, like you said, the rags to riches, she comes in, she has no experience, nothing, and she ends up being the star at the end. That kind of like didn't work for me. Like, she wasn't this amazing out of nowhere performer. You never had the sense as like, oh, this girl could carry the show. I just didn't really feel that. Then they literally put her in a position where she has to learn the entire show in one afternoon. Maybe if she was like an understudy, or if they never even showed that she knew what was really going on, you know, and suddenly one of the other characters says, oh, she can do it. Sure, she's going to be a star. And then the director spends the entire afternoon turning her into, and maybe that's supposed to be like his magic. He's such a genius director that he turned this girl from a two left-footed disaster into the star of the show in one afternoon. I mean, I don't, man, maybe I completely missed everything. I lost a lot of, like, I was trying to go back and read through, and I'm like, there are things that I didn't remember. And I was wondering, it was like, did I just forget that because I was so thrown off by the second part of the movie? You know, suddenly being a straight up dance number for
Get angry
25
about it.
minutes?
Sounds
I was
like.
like, what the hell happened to the movie I was watching? But that's like, I don't know, where do you fall?
I actually just yesterday watched 90% of Gold Diggers of 1933, the other movie Busby Berkeley,
Sure.
based on Rob's thing.
Yeah.
And what's funny is there's a lot of similarities between that movie and this movie. They're both dealing with the Great Depression. And I love that it's with 42nd Street, it's very matter of fact about this is what goes into making a Broadway hit play.
Right.
And it's a lot of like all the fun on stage is negative behind, like, you know, like I said, mentioned in the synopsis, the casting couch kind of innuendos,
Right.
like how they're being yelled at by this guy. You know, I think for a 33 audience, they probably don't expect to see a director. This idea of the director as like this little emperor screaming at the talent and just being like, no, you're screwing it up. You're never, am I on the right set right now? You know, and I thought Werner Baxter did a really good job at kind of playing that without knowing anything about his inner life. Like there's an interesting scene where everyone's going out. He's like, you all get the night off. And he makes his stage manager a guy. He's like, are you doing anything? And the guy's like, no, he lies. He's like, well, come up to my room with me. And I was like, that's a weird like, are they suggesting like sort of a gay relationship there?
Yeah.
Or are they suggesting, and then that to me, that's even funnier that the stage manager is just completely like, he's going on a date with a woman, but he's going to go sleep with the director. Like, it's all part of show business, you know?
Yeah. See, I was so thrown that's one of the things that I didn't quite remember. And you're mentioning it now, like, oh yeah, that did happen, didn't it?
The main thing with this movie is probably the part that you rejected the most is those dance sequences, because from everything from Gremlins to the Muppets, like that Busby Berkeley, those geometric, like all the legs going together, that's invented here. And it's, if you think about it, it's, especially knowing where cinema's come from, like it's amazing. And it's not like typical movie making. It's set up like a play, like you said, like, oh, we're watching the play. But a lot of the camera work is stuff you could never do in a theater. And which is what makes it work as a film, is like suddenly you're above looking down, and suddenly you're getting all these angles you would never get as an audience member. And they're just like breathtakingly inventive, like really, you suddenly have to be like, okay, I'm not watching the movie anymore. Now I'm just a participant watching these dance routines.
Right. And the movie just really did have a lot of interesting things going on, you know, and like you said, it's about all the behind the performance aspects of what goes into putting a show together and how stressful it can be. And like, but you see this beautiful thing on stage, but there's really all of this kind of hell that sometimes you have to go through. And that feeling, like we've done theater, that feeling of like, you get to like show week, you're thinking like, how are we going to do this? This is a disaster. Come opening night, suddenly it works. The way that it's put together in the movie, I was like really into that part of it. Then the show starts and I was like, all right, give us a couple of numbers. You know what would have worked for me, as if they did a little bit of this, but if they had gone backstage more away from the show to show the madness of what's going on backstage too during the show, you're running around, you're changing costumes, all this crazy stuff. There are little snippets of that, but really the last 20-25 minutes is just the performances, which you're right, were visually like really incredible. But at the same time, I just kept thinking like, what happened in the movie I was watching?
I don't know. It worked on me enough. This is in my top 5, not the bottom 5. I think Gold Diggers of 1933, though, is a better movie. That's a movie that, and it's funny because this cast that's in this movie, 42nd Street, a lot of them are in that movie. And a lot of this cast is in one of the next movies we'll be talking about, Lady for a Day. Guy Kibbe, the guy who's like the producer sleeping with his actress in this. Ned Sparks, I think, who is the stage manager in this, who Ned Sparks is, and we'll talk about him soon when he has a better performance. But I thought he's great. Like he's as a character actor in these movies.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
His reactions to things are just fantastic. I don't have much more to say just on this movie. I do like that it was made for people during the Depression. It was like a movie that was like, we're going through this with you. We're all in this together. Like whether you're a gangster or like an upright citizen on 42nd Street, we can all be, we're together, united on 42nd Street.
There was so much about this movie that I didn't really like, that the stuff that I had problems with bothered me so much, because I was like, you could have done a little better there, and then you would have had something that I was like, wow, you should watch this.
I'm really interested to see. I'm interested to see what you're going to pick at the end of this.
We'll get there,
because I feel like you've had a problem with just a little problem with just about everything. All right, we're going to move to the next one.
Here we go.
This show, we do spoilers, right? We do spoilers because we have to. We're talking about old movies, and that's just the way it is. And we're deciding if we like them or not. This movie, almost part of me feels bad giving spoilers because it was so bizarre, and it made me.
This movie really is kind of just it's
like. And me, executive producer Goldstein, and I watched this, and we had completely different opinions on this movie. And both of us, the entire movie, were like constantly, what is going on? So let's get into it. Lady for a Day, September 13th, 1933, directed by Frank Capra. Yes, that Frank Capra, the one who did It's a Wonderful Life. This is the one I saw free on something called Plex that made me watch a ton of commercials. Oh yeah, and you did too, right?
I watched it on YouTube actually, because I was like, this Plex thing, can I get Plex on my TV? And then I thought, you know what? Some of this stuff is just on YouTube. So I went and I searched for it. It took me a minute to cycle through some stuff to find it, but it was there. The whole thing was there. It played. It looked great.
I got stopped like every 10 minutes with like 10 minutes of bad commercials, but I did see this whole movie.
I wonder if that like negatively impact. Well, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. I had feelings on this one. 96 minutes. Before I get to the cast, let's get to this. Was nominated 4 times. One for Outstanding Picture, one for Directing, one for Actress, and one for Writing. All of them lost. And notably, when Frank Capra lost for Director, he was halfway up to the stage thinking he won before he realized he had lost.
Wrong Frank.
Wrong Frank. It's the wrong Frank. Lady for a Day is a 1933 American pre-code comedy drama based on the 1929 short story Madame La Gimp by Damon Runyon. Okay, May Robson played Apple Annie. Warren William played Gangster Dave the Dude. Glenda Farrell played Missouri Martin. Ned Sparks, who I mentioned I liked as the stage manager in the last play in 42nd Street. I called it a play. That's how it shows you how.
I think that just tells you everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Ned Sparks played Happy McGuire, the second right-hand man to Dave the Dude. And Guy Kibbe played a pool shark, Henry D. Blake. I feel bad. All of our listeners, you might hate this movie. You might love this movie. Pause our show and go watch it. And then come back.
And then
you need to just pause it, watch it, and come back. Because this movie, wow.
Yeah, I 1000% agree with that, or more.
I'm gonna shoe this. I'm gonna try and just describe this in general terms, basic, and then cut to you.
Okay.
This movie begins with, I guess, not necessarily homeless, maybe homeless. Poor. We're introduced to poor people on the street. There's like a woman selling flowers. There's a man with no legs begging for money. There's a blind man with like some kind of a accordion thing. And there's a 70-year-old, looks like a witch, kind of totally beat down woman selling apples named Apple Annie.
Yes.
And we're in the Great Depression, so they're on the street. They can't get any money. This is background. Also, we're introduced to these gangsters. And think Goodfellas. We got these mafia guys, Dave the Dude. This guy will bet on anything. He's gambling. We're introduced to him. He's betting on a fly, whether it will land on a sugar cube or not. His right-hand man, Happy, next to him. The thing you got to know about Dave, though, is he is one of Apple Annie's big buyers. He likes buying the apple because he feels like it gives him good luck, right?
Right.
So this is our background. We have gangsters and kind of homeless or street people. Apple Annie's been writing letters to her daughter. She had a daughter. She gave her up at birth, presumably, overseas.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah. She sends her letters and she pretends she's this highfalutin society lady and she lives in a hotel. I'm telling you, if you're listening to this podcast, stop it while I'm explaining this, because once I get to the twist. So she's telling her daughter she lives in the hotel and lying to her. And she's this rich socialite, New York City. So is it New York City they're in? Maybe.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
New York City socialite. So her daughter's buys it hook, line, and sinker. She sends her a response. Hey, I'm marrying this count, but his family won't let me marry until they meet you. Instant problem, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's their problem. And this movie is not a comedy at this point. I didn't feel like it was a comedy, right? It's very serious.
It's very serious. I mean, there's some like I don't know what you can call this movie, but,
Yeah,
but let's finish up. We'll get into it.
Okay, all right. So, and I'm just gonna here's the twist. These hard-boiled gangster guys decide they're gonna Pretty Woman Apollonie. They're gonna put her up in a rich, fancy hotel, and it's not lady for a day. It's more like lady for a week.
Right. Yeah.
And they're gonna help lie to her daughter and the count, and they're gonna dress all of their other gangster friends, who are like some of them dumb as posts, in suits, and pretend they're like ambassadors and kings. And they're gonna really go all in on making this count believe that Apollonie is rich.
Right.
And the incentive for these people, this whole mafia gang, to do this is nothing. There's no reason for them to do this.
You're right. Yeah, I thought there was a scene early where the dude said he attempted to give a reason for doing it. And it seemed like he wanted to preserve his like luck. But like once they get into it, they are in.
They're all in on
They're
this
all
thing.
in.
To the
There's
point of
no getting out of it.
kidnapping newspaper reporters. And you think they're dead because like there's like a scene where he takes the guy into a room and they're like, yeah, we'll tell you all about it in here. Door closes. And the next day the newspaper article is like missing reporters.
Right.
So now we're in kidnapping. They're committing crimes to help this lie continue. My favorite part of Jeff, the thing that sold me on this movie, that I loved it, is that Happy, the secondhand man, the whole movie is like, boss, what are we doing? What are we doing? He's got this perpetual shocked look of walking in a room and watching all these thugs learn how to bow properly. He's just like, boss, what are we even doing here?
He was also my favorite character in the entire thing. They're in the midst of the planning, and like we're like 4 or 5 layers into this thing. Yeah. Of like they are so deep, there's no way to unravel this thing.
Yeah, you got to keep
that
going.
To me was the best part of the story. Is something would complicate things, and they were like, instead of saying, "All right, let's call it off," they're like, "All right, we'll do this," and it makes it 10 times worse.
Like she wrote in the letter that she's married and there's a stepfather, and they're like, let her figure it out. And they're like, you're gonna let the homeless apple selling lady figure this out after you put her up in a hotel? And he's like, all right, we're gonna get this pool shark, and he's gonna pretend he's the guy,
right? Who they call a judge, and I don't think was a judge of any kind.
No, he just spoke really eloquently, like he was a good he was good at selling, because as a pool shark he's got to pretend to stink. And then
right. So I will say, I'll finish the one line that stuck with me from his right hand man there, when he's walking through the room, everybody's rehearsing, they're all doing different things, and he just stops and he goes, I'm gonna go down to the insane asylum and hang out with some sensible people. And he walks out of the room. He was just firing on all cylinders through the whole movie. And it almost seemed like every time he walked into the room, whatever his line was the best line in the scene. And
he'd walk in totally all stiff, straight up. You look like he's about to tell him that the hit just went off. And then he's looking around like, what? He always had that perpetual like shock.
Right. Yeah. He's like, dude, we're running a criminal enterprise here. And what are you doing?
They asked him, I remember they asked him to play the stepfather. Like, you're going to be married to Apollonie. He's like, what? Like, no, I have a wife.
He said something like, you might not believe this, but she's got a really big problem with me marrying other people.
Oh, yeah. They look over at that other guy, the dumb guy that they call Shakespeare, and he's just like, oh, no. And they both are like, yeah, no, not him. You can't do it. That guy had a great arc too. Like when they're training them how to bow and speak politely. But Dave the dude gets arrested by the police because they figure out this whole kidnapping thing, or they're onto them. They cut to the guy, Shakespeare, still making all the gangsters keep rehearsing. They're all tired and falling on the floor. He's like, no, you got to do it. Do the Apollonie speech. I
hope everybody did watch the movie and is now returning and has any idea what we're talking about.
I've never seen a movie that's like this. And the other secondary twist is after Dave the dude is arrested and for kidnapping all these newspaper reporters and admitting it, the police, the mayor, and the governor all decide they want to know why, and they hear the story. And they decide to help. They're like, oh, yeah. Oh, you're going to help a homeless woman pretend to be rich? Yeah, no problem. Where's the party at? We're going. So like the whole city unites to lie to this woman's daughter and the
Right.
count.
The best part of the whole thing is that the movie ends and we are still in the middle of this lie.
It's all this positive. One of my favorite lines in the movie is in the cab, because it's one that I asked out loud watching the movie, and then the movie answered. And I love it when they do that. Is the newspaper reporters being like, "Hey, what about us? We were kidnapped." And they're just like, you were just drunk for 3 days. Like, we were kidnapped.
No, you were drunk. Okay, that's it. You shut up. That's the story. That's it.
It's like so ridiculous and preposterous. But again, having that happy guy with us and being like, yes, this is preposterous. Why are we not just committing regular crimes? Like, to me, that sold the movie. The guy playing Dave the Dude was really great too.
Yep. So I will say I really enjoyed this movie. There were things that I had little issues with here and there, like everything else, but they didn't bother me as much as the stuff that bothered me in the other movies, because it could be made today in almost exactly the same way. You could take this script and make this movie today, maybe add a couple of things to it, and you wouldn't have to change anything. It would still work. It would still be absolutely hilarious and ridiculous. You could shoot it the same way. It felt more cinematic than anything else, like modernly cinematic. It felt like this was a huge step away from these things that feel like stage plays made into movies. It really had a great flow to it. There was no point where like a scene was over and then we stopped and you're waiting for the next scene to start, almost as if they're resetting the stage. And I was reading a review that referred to it as like more just cornball Capra stuff. I didn't feel like these were gangsters with a heart of gold who were doing the right thing for the right reason.
No.
I felt like they were like, we're going to do this. And then they just got so deep into it that they couldn't get out. They weren't doing this for altruistic reasons. They were just like, we're in it. And the further they got in it, it felt like the more the dude was like committed to it. And he's like, no, we're going to do this. I started it. I don't care how out of control it is. We are doing this.
I really appreciate that about his character in this movie. He's just like, the more in deep he gets, the more he's like, we're going to figure a way out of this and still make it work. Like,
right.
That's like admirable in any job, in any profession. Absolutely. To have that passion to see the project through.
I would say, like, even from like a screenwriting perspective, there were so many layers. I never for 1 second during this movie was like, I want to go do something else.
I got to know how this ends. And I assumed she's going to get caught, right? You think some point the lie comes out.
Right, exactly.
And that's what this movie totally shocks. The lie doesn't come out. She lies to her daughter, and her daughter, presumably after the credits roll, she goes back to being Apple Annie, right? Because they're not putting her up in that anymore.
Right.
So,
but then again, there's, like I said, they're still in the middle of the lie. Like, what are they going to do? Like, the sequel is like, we're coming back for the wedding, and like, we got to do it again. Let's get the band back together.
I'm not a big proponent on sequels generally, but I would love if they had done a sequel to this movie. I think a lot of the people that I saw that didn't like this movie in reviews couldn't get past, and I understand it, that it's not realistic. I think as you're watching the movie, it begins very realistic. Like I walked through like this street people, gangsters. It's very built in the real world, but slowly you either accept that this is a fantasy movie, like in a Disney magical fantasy sense,
right?
Or you're just going to constantly be like that happy character and be angry at the movie and be like, what is happening? Why would they do this? So I think at that point I just gave in and was just like, they're doing it, man. Just stop asking why. It's a movie and it's giving you something different.
One of the things that bugged me was that it seemed like it was going to be her movie. And then it really goes away from her. And then it goes back to her later on. She does get a couple of great scenes towards the end, but it's almost like the rug's pulled out from under her when instead of her getting a chance to come clean, everybody bails her out.
Yeah.
Like everybody shows up. Like you said, the governor walks in and the mayor walks in, the governor all these people come in and they're like, hello, it was wonderful the last time we saw you. And she's like, what the hell's going on? What she's doing is also rather ridiculous. Where she's taking a chance that these letters are going to get to the hotel and that she has this scheme going on where she gets the letters, so I did buy in. It felt real, but it also felt like really ridiculous. there should have been more of the Missouri character.
Oh, she was great.
Like
Yeah.
her, she was great, but
Glenda
she's
Farrell.
only in like a handful of scenes. I like again, like I was saying earlier, if you could make this today, but I think if you make this today, you take a lot of the stuff that the judge was doing as far as like putting the show together, and you give that to Missouri. Like instead of the judge being like, I'm going to write speeches for everybody, Missouri writes the speeches. She becomes the one who's pulling the strings behind because she's in show business, so she should really be the one who's like, all right, we need this. I'll figure it out. I got it here. I'm going to write all the speeches. You say this. She's, because she's got all the dancer girls. When we meet her, she's singing songs because she runs the bar, or I think it was called Missouri Martin's, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So she, this is her trade. She should have been the one like driving a lot of it. But I did like that once the romantic couple came in, it was very, very small. Because every single one of these movies, it seemed like had some little like schmaltzy romance going on. But this one was like, here it is for the people who need that. But it's so far in the background that it's not really important. There were some things that were, unfortunate in the movie, but still so utterly ridiculous that it almost isn't as offensive as it should be. The count is like, we're going to call the Spanish embassy because I don't feel like all this is on
right.
So they call, but because they're in that apartment, the butler has to connect the phone call. So the butler calls the dude and he's like, they're calling the Spanish consulate. We're screwed. The dude's like, all right, what are we going to do? Who speaks Spanish? Do you speak Spanish? Can anybody speak Spanish? Nobody speaks Spanish. So what do they decide to do? They connect the call to the dude's apartment, wherever the dude is. I think they're upstairs at Missouri Martin's place.
Yeah.
And the dude decides to speak in a Japanese dialect, as if there's a young Japanese man running the switchboard at the Spanish consulate. And the count just buys it. And he hangs up the phone and he's like, it's a Japanese kid. I don't know what's going on. It's offensive. It's racist, but it's so utterly ridiculous.
It wasn't as offensive to me as in some of these other movies where they're doing it in lieu of getting a Japanese actor to do it. It's like, to me, it's okay if a character's a little racist in the movie because people are racist in real life.
Yes.
It's when the movie inherently has racist elements.
Why did he choose, you know what? We don't have anybody who speaks Spanish, so I'll be Japanese.
It's that confusion, right? It's that we'll just sow discord. Like this guy's expecting someone at least with a Spanish accent, and we'll do a guy who it's like a weird stereotype Japanese accent.
It was very strange.
Before we move off this movie, let me read, because I skipped some of the background on this movie that I think is interesting for you people at home listening. Frank Capra had misgivings about the project. He reminded studio head Harry Cohn he was spending $300,000 on a picture in which the heroine is 70 years old. To which Cohn responded, all I know is the thing's got a wallop. Go ahead. And I would agree with that sentiment. It did have a wallop. They did 4 drafts on it, and the main thing they added to it was all the Great Depression elements. That was the last stuff to go in. Capra cast this film with an assortment of character actors under contract. He also went to downtown Los Angeles neighborhood where he had sold newspapers as a boy and hired some of the street people who congregated there as extras who would add color to the film. 1 week before filming began, he offered the role of Apple Annie to 75-year-old May Robson, most of whose career had been spent performing on stage. In later years, Capra thought the fact she and most of the supporting players were unfamiliar to movie audiences helped the public accept them as the down-in-the-luck characters that they are. I think that's interesting, like that maybe the guy with no legs was a real homeless. Hopefully they paid these people well.
Oh, yeah, of course.
For being in the movie. I think that's interesting that he connected this Frank Capra guy. He's going somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
Would you say the wrong Frank won the Oscar?
You want to save that until the Golden Boy?
Oh, yeah, maybe we should. Maybe we'll just have a quick conversation.
Yeah, let's wait. We'll tie that all in at the end there.
All right, Jeff, I'm losing my voice. Can we move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
The Private Life of Henry VIII came out August 17th, 1933, directed by Alexander Korda. I own this on Criterion. I bought the Alexander Korda collection, which is up here. Alexander Korda's Private Lives on Criterion. I bought it during the 50% sale. Currently going on, but by the time you guys hear this at home, it'll be over. It's every November. Where was I? Where you watch this on Amazon?
Yes.
Okay. Length, 97 minutes. Actress, Binnie Barnes as Catherine Howard. That's the 5th wife. Charles Lofton as Henry VIII. And Merle Oberon as Anne Boleyn, wife 2. I just highlighted those ones. Elsa Lancaster, who was Charles Laughton's real life wife,
No.
played Anne of Cleves. She was the fourth wife. This movie was nominated twice. Once for acting, Charles Laughton, who won for playing Henry VIII. And it also was nominated for Best Picture, which it did not win. Private Life of Henry VIII is a 1933 British film. It focuses on the marriage of King Henry VIII of England. It established Korda as a leading filmmaker and Laughton as a box office star. Alexander Korda was seeking a film project suitable for Charles Laughton and his wife, Elsa Lanchester. Originally, the story was to focus solely on the marriage of King Henry VIII and his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. But as the project grew, the story was modified to focus on 5 of Henry's 6 wives. Only the first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was omitted because those involved had no particular interest in her, describing her as a respectable woman in the film's intertitles. Korda chose to ignore the religious and political aspects of Henry's reign, as the film makes no mention of the break with Rome and instead focuses on Henry's relationships with his wives. In the 1920s and 30s, many in Britain bristled at Hollywood's domination of the film industry. By 1925, only 5% of the films shown in Britain were British. So in 1932, Stephen Tallents called for the projection of England, warning that if the British film industry failed to tell its own stories that would define Britain, then Hollywood would do so for them. This sparked interest in the Tudor era and an image of the period as a prosperous, happy time, untroubled by class divisions and economic depressions. The accuracy of the characterizations in the film is grossly exaggerated and often wrong. One of the reasons Alfred Hitchcock was able to blow up his career is because England invested heavily in their directors over there, and he became like their top star there. I just thought I'd throw that in there as a guy who loves Hitchcock.
Sure.
Here's the synopsis, Jeff. The film begins 20 years into King Henry VIII's reign. In May 1536, in the immediate aftermath of the execution of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, Henry marries Jane Seymour, who dies in childbirth 18 months later. He then weds a German princess, Anne of Cleves. This marriage ends in divorce after Anne deliberately makes herself unattractive so that she may be free to marry her sweetheart. Henry next marries the beautiful, ambitious lady Catherine Howard. She has rejected love all of her life in favor of ambition. But after her marriage, she falls in love with Henry's handsome courtier, Thomas Culpeper, who had attempted to woo her in the past. Their liaison is discovered by Henry's court, and the two are executed. The weak and aging Henry consoles himself with a final marriage to Catherine Parr, who proves domineering. In the final scene, while Parr is no longer in the room, the king breaks the fourth wall, saying, 6 wives, and the best of them's the worst. The end. Jeff,
Yeah.
break it down. What'd you think?
Well, that was the movie.
That was the movie.
Yeah. This more than any of them felt to me like a stage production. There was a lot of like, all right, there's this scene, then there's that scene, then there's this scene. And it was so disjointed because it was just jumping from like, okay, now he's going to marry this woman and now he's going to marry that woman. And I think this movie is also hurt by like how much media we've seen that delves into Henry VIII in this time period in the Tudors, because I kept thinking like the opening scene is Anne Boleyn's beheading. And I'm like, isn't the Anne Boleyn story like the most compelling of all of these? Not only does it skip over all the political machinations and the break from Rome and everything, the switching of he literally changed the religion of Britain, so that he could marry another woman, and then they don't do any of that. But also, it just barely glazes over the fact that most of this was going on because he couldn't produce a male heir, And then there's a son born. I don't think that son made it very long in real life. Because that's how his Queen Elizabeth is his daughter. And she eventually takes the throne. But this movie isn't interested in dealing with any of that stuff. It's almost a little bit farcical, but not silly enough to really be funny enough for me anyway, aside from the fact that every time he walked into a room, it really looked like his tights were too tight and he was really uncomfortable. He was just this big, jovial, boisterous guy. So I was kind of confused why he won Best Actor, honestly. How did he beat Mooney from Chain Gang?
That is criminal.
Yeah. Absolutely. I did love one scene in this movie, and that's the scene where the German princess tricks him into letting her out of this situation. And I wonder, that's his wife, right?
Yeah, this is
off
real life
wife.
wife.
I wonder if that scene like sparkled as much as it did because they had such like real life chemistry, because like she was confounding and he was so spun around by her. He was just like, fine, go, like he's like, I'm the greatest card player in the land, and she just repeatedly just
Yes, beating him.
destroys him and embarrasses him. But he's not like off with your head. He's just like, oh my god, woman, like.
Yeah, we never really see the version of him that would cut his wife's head off in this movie.
No.
They had to skip that.
Right.
But it's funny you mentioned that scene as being the best, because the core of this movie was supposed to be their relationship, and then they added all this other stuff. So I wonder if maybe that's just the best bits.
Right.
That's the inspiration, was those scenes. I don't have a lot to say on this movie. I was not a super fan of it. I put we're in the midst of the Great Depression globally, and this movie gets made showing the upper class wasting money on lavish dinners, gambling, and pearl necklaces. It shows the working class and peasants as carefree, happy Brits without a single complaint. All the ones in the crowd watching the beheading are like, "Oh, down in front, I should have worn a nicer dress to the thing."
Right. Yeah.
Like, they're all happy, and you're like,
yeah.
The servants are happy. They're all like laughing in the basement, like making the food for Henry. And I'm like, this is so tone deaf to where it is right now. Again, I'm not British though, and I know, like, I don't care a whit about like kings and princes and modern stuff. I like Shakespeare just fine, but like I don't generally gravitate towards those movies.
Right.
And like you said, a stage play. A lot of this, I'm just like, oh man, this is like high school theater costumes.
Yeah,
like sets.
Well, that's right. I texted you a couple of weeks ago when I started watching the movies, and I think that was like exactly how I put it to you. Was this felt like community theater? Like I went down the road to the local players, and they put on this lame version of Henry VIII.
Like, to me, it's called Private Life of Henry VIII. So to me, it wants to show us like, here's the real Henry VIII, like behind the scenes.
Right.
It's kind of like hitting plot beats without an overall message. Like, is the message, like I put, like, is the message that you're like the last wife he ends up with, a nagging wife is the best wife? Like, what is the message of this movie?
Yeah. I think that's kind of what they're saying.
Yeah, because he goes through 6. Are we supposed to evaluate them based on the merits that Henry is telling us? Because to me, he's just a bad guy. So, he killed the wife. He's like, his second wife dies, or his third wife dies in childbirth. And he has that, probably one of the only good scenes that I did laugh at. Henry is informed the baby is alive, but his second wife has died. And he looks into the camera somberly and says, "Poor pretty little Jane, God rest her sweet soul." And he looks at the thing, "Where's the prince?" Like, smiles at the camera. I'm like, okay, that's a good bit of direction, like and acting.
Right. I will say to Lofton's credit that like when the first time he walks in, I mean, he does have a commanding presence.
Yeah.
Like when he's in the scene, for the most part, it's his scene, aside from the scene with his wife. And maybe that's because he was more generous as an actor with his wife, because it was his wife. And he's like, I'm going to give you more than I've been giving, the other or something. I don't know. I just felt that scene really worked. But otherwise, the rest of the movie, I was just like, I'm not into this. And
it didn't work on me. And like, I couldn't get invested in it. That Elsa Lanchester, she played the Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh. And
Katie Nana from Mary Poppins, the original maid, or the original nanny that gets replaced, like at the beginning.
Oh.
So I thought that was interesting that she had this career that spans this long period of time.
Right.
I'm ready to move on. I'm running out.
Yeah. We got one left. I'm good.
Jeff, we've made it to the end. 10th movie, Little Women, came out on November 16th, 1933, directed by George Cukor. Amazon is where I saw it. You as well?
Yes.
As you said 4 hours ago, I saw them all on Amazon, Kenny.
It took a while to find this one, though. The first couple of times I did searches for Little Women, it was every other version of Little Women. And this came up some other way. I just stumbled on it. And I was like, oh, they do have it. Okay, here we go.
All right, well, I'm glad you watched hopefully the correct one. This was 115 minutes. It starred Katharine Hepburn as Josephine March. And we don't really need to go too much more into the cast after that. This is a Katharine Hepburn movie. But if the names come up, we'll bring them up. Nominated 3 times, won once. It was nominated for directing, George Cukor, Best Picture, and writing, which it won for writing adaptation. Every one of these movies, I'm like, it's a pre-code movie. I wonder if next year will I each say they're all what do you say on the code year? This is a code year movie.
Post, well, it's not
post yet.
So it's, I don't know.
Currently code.
Currently, yeah, you're gonna have to come up.
Come up with something. All right, this is the third screen adaptation of Little Women. There were 2 silent versions before it. The prime goal of George Cukor, the director, was to emphasize the juxtaposition between sacrifice and family life.
If you've got to do a synopsis of Little Women for anyone who's watching this, I mean,
some people, Jeff, this is my first Little Women. I've never seen a movie. I've never read it, and I didn't.
I never read it. I can talk about my only experience with Little Women once we get into it. But all right, go ahead. Synopsis away.
Synopsis. Set in Concord, Massachusetts, during and after the American Civil War, the film is a series of vignettes focusing on the struggles and adventures of the 4 March sisters and their mother, affectionately called Marmee, while they await the return of their father, a colonel and chaplain to the Union Army. I wasn't sure if he was Union or Confederate, and I was afraid to ask. So I'm glad this Wikipedia article told me he's in the Union. Spirited tomboy Jo, who caters to the whims of her well-to-do Aunt March, dreams of becoming a famous author, and she writes plays for her sisters to perform for the local children. Amy is pretty but selfish. Meg works as a governess, and sensitive Beth practices on her clavichord. I'm not sure what that is. Was that I thought she played the piano. It's a clavichord.
Executive producer Goldstein in the editing booth. According to composer Davide Verota at davideverota.com, the first keyboard instrument that used strings, the clavichord, came to be in the late Middle Ages, although nobody knows exactly when it was invented. The clavichord had an action similar to that of the piano, but the tone it produced was much softer, too quiet to play in a concert. A small clavichord makes a sound that is easily covered by the noise produced by a refrigerator. So yeah, basically a piano. Back to you, Kenny.
The girls meet Laurie, who has come to live with his grandfather, Mr. Lawrence, next door. The Lawrences invite them to a lavish party where Meg meets Laurie's tutor, Judge John Brown. Look, these daughters get up to a bunch of stuff with the neighbors. Jo moves to New York, and she ends up writing Little Women and then coming back home. And she does not get with the boy that the movie sets up that they're going to get with Laurie by the end.
No. But one of the sisters does.
Jeff, what did you think of Little Women, the movie?
I thought this movie was fine. I found Katharine Hepburn a little aggravating in this movie. And I think that might just because at the beginning, she's slightly immature and she ages as the movie goes on. But I am familiar with the story. So I was just kind of like, all right, it is like the 8,000th adaptation of Little Women, even though it was like, would you say the third? The first non-silent version, but one of many, many, many adaptations of Little Women. There was like, that's how they did this scene and that's how they did that scene. And I did not like Laurie. I thought he was really aggravating. I was wondering at the end too, like it seemed to me there was an incredible age gap between
Josephine.
Jo and
the Professor Bear.
Yes. And I was not sure if the age gap is supposed to look as deep as it was because she ends up with him. I don't know if I just didn't feel like they did a good enough job aging her up as the movie went along. But still, he seemed like he was like 60 years old and she ends up with him and she can't be more than like 20s?
Early 20s. I think back then, though, there was a bit more... At least in the movies, it seemed like there was except younger girls getting with older men feels like it's something that happened a lot, at least in these earlier movies. I don't know if that translates to it happened a lot in reality or not.
But I was like going into it, I was like, oh, it's Katharine Hepburn. At least she should be fantastic. And I didn't think she was bad. I just thought there were points where I was like, wow, she's just like running around yelling a lot. So, and I will say, like I mentioned earlier, that I do not like musicals at all. And a few years ago, I got involved I was working tech for high school theater. And one of the musicals we did was a musical version of Little Women. And honestly, it was like one of the best theater experiences I've ever had because the cast that we had of these young, like high school performers it mesmerize me that we had like 5 girls in the same class at the same time in the same school who were all as good as they were. And I really enjoyed that. And then watching this movie, I was like, this wasn't as good as the high school musical I was involved in, And it wasn't bad enough for me to be like, that was bad, but I didn't like it enough to be like, hey, you should watch this version of Little Women over the Greta Gerwig version of Little Women or the one Winona Ryder was in, like in the 90s, or any other adaptation of Little Women that you've ever been exposed to.
I think this movie, similar to the Mae West one, hinges on your reaction to Katharine Hepburn in this movie, like the actress, because I bought in on her. I loved her in this movie. I actually put down, I enjoyed the movie. I thought it's a great movie for when it's cold outside and you feel a little down and you want to get a bowl of soup and a blanket and just throw on Little Women, 1933. You know, I'm looking for, are you addressing like working class issues? Are you addressing like some of these topics of the time? And they don't, but you can also argue that's because the whole movie is through a 15-year-old girl's perspective, essentially. So she's not seeing necessarily what's going on with her father out at the war or what's going on. You know, there's no minority characters in this movie and the Civil War is going on. That was had me suspicious, especially when she went to New York and it was like a white servant there. And I was just like, is this cool? Are they just avoiding having minorities in this movie? The Civil War is a topic, but it's never really a topic, you know? But again, as comfort food and as a strong female role, which there were not a lot of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I thought Katharine Hepburn's like kind of wild, all over the place performance. I loved it. Like, I just thought you're right. As a child, she's like up, she's down, like she's delivering these lines so strangely, and then she's calm. And I totally buy her not getting with the kid. And I feel like a weaker actress, you would never, you know, you'd be like, just get with him. Like she has to show by this sheer sort of aggressive personality that she knows what she wants, you know?
Yeah.
And the few bits at the end where she isn't sure what she wants, I think it shows like a vulnerability to her that I really liked. And there were a lot of points, Jeff, in this movie. I'm too sentimental, I think, and like where I would start to tear up. And I teared up whenever they say the title of the movie in a movie. Like I get,
yes.
And the first time they do it like 8 times in this movie, but the first time when they're reading the dad letter, he's like, "My Little Women." I teared a little. I was just like, oh man. Like he comes home. I enjoy. This is very similar to my reaction to State Fair in that, like, there are these very positive movies. State Fair I probably liked a little bit better because I can relate more to those characters than I can to this family because this is so long ago. Essentially, none of these women really work. They are presented as poor, but they live in like a mansion still. It's a big house. I don't know. I was executive producer Goldstein turned it off halfway through. Could not get through it.
Oh my goodness.
So maybe not for everybody. Don't take my word for it.
Like I wouldn't put this in my bottom 3 either. I didn't think it was bad. I just was not like in a place where I was super like connecting with it. Very much a story about the sisters, you know, so it makes sense to me that they weren't like really dealing with some of the bigger issues that were going on. You know, it's about their relationships and how they come and go, you know, in each other's lives. And Lori ends up with, I believe it's Amy, and then Beth dies, and then the other sister's just kind of there.
She's the one that gets married, right? She's kind of like her story is the least interesting,
right? Because she gets married and then she has kids, so she's just kind of like the other sister, you know, where the more she's the only one who's not really dealing with a bunch of stuff.
She grew up too soon.
You're right, the one who knows what she's doing, and like Jo has to figure her life out and how she becomes a writer and how everything fits, you know. And Amy ends up going out and learning how to be a proper lady and be with Amy ends up doing everything that they're trying to get Jo to do at the beginning of the movie. Jo wants nothing to do with Aunt March, who's trying to teach her to be a proper lady, you know. And Amy at the beginning is like a disaster, and she ends up going with her and connecting with her and becoming the proper lady. And then Beth is really kind of like the emotional anchor of the story. I thought it was a fine movie that I didn't dislike anything about aside from the guy that played Lori. And it was just like fine enough. I never wanted to shut it off. There were a couple of these where I was like, I think I've had enough, but I got to keep going.
Yeah, there were a couple of points where I'd look at the clock and be like, wow, there's still like an hour and a half of this movie. How much did I watch? 20 minutes? Unlike Cavalcade, though, which goes over a long period of time, longer than this one, but this movie goes over a period of time, but you feel close to the characters and you feel like you're growing a little with them, whereas like Cavalcade, it's just like you're not growing with anybody. They're just like,
that's why there is a reason that this story, you know, has had such a long life and that it keeps getting remade. And like every generation, there's a filmmaker who's like, I want to do Little Women. This story isn't ever going away. We're going to see this done again and again.
Again, it's a great cast for female actresses that you know, weren't getting these great. I mean, you're either playing prostitutes or like
Right.
This movie had approximately 3,000 items, including costume, furnishing, and household appliances, were authenticated by researchers. A former artist and interior decorator, Hobie Irwin, modeled the interior of the March home after Orchid House, Louisa May Alcott's Massachusetts home. Original prints of the film employed the use of hand coloring, which we didn't see hand coloring in any of these that I remember. Jeff, I thought it was a fine movie. I'm not picking this one for Golden Boy. I'm going to spoil this one right now. But I think this is a good stay at home. Look after yourself. Feel good.
Yeah.
You have a bad day, watch Little Women. I feel like the title for a boy growing up in the time that we grew up in, I feel like a movie like Little Women or a book like Little Women, because of the title, I'm not going to read that, you know?
Right. Like, this isn't for me. This isn't for me.
And that's sad, because having watched it, I'm like, I think this is a movie for everybody. It's not just a movie for women, you know?
Right.
Okay. That's all I got to say on this movie. You ready to wrap up?
Sure.
Stop share.
Here we go.
Oh, we're back, Jeff. We're big.
Barreling towards the end, or rather limping to the finish line.
Racing to the finish line. 6 hours of Golden Boy. I know we should have raccoon eyes by the end of this. These 10 movies. Are you glad you watched them?
Well, yeah, because this has been fun.
Right? It's been fun. The one thing I've seen from this is people who, when we go to do Golden Boy and they ask to be on the show or they're on the show, and they're like, oh, I got to watch how many movies, what movies? And then there's always that one or two movies that you're like, I would never have watched otherwise. And I'm so glad I watched them.
Oh, totally. I wouldn't have watched any of these ever, honestly.
No, there's two movies for me that get the solid recommendation. There's two movies here that I really, really liked.
Okay. I have two as well.
Two at the top?
I'm going to bet they're the same.
But will we choose the same? That's the question. Jeff, get your envelope out.
I have a tiny envelope.
The music is playing.
All right.
And for the sixth.
Do we do it at the same time?
We'll do it at the same time.
We have to pull it up at the same time. I'm removing it from the envelope.
Proper procedures. Everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and the winner of the 6th Academy Awards and Golden Boy number 6 is...
What?
Oh my God!
Oh no!
It's a tie. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang and Lady for a Day. And the 6th Golden Boy for Best Picture goes to two movies: I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang by Mervyn LeRoy and Lady for a Day by Frank Capra. Embrace or escape your Great Depression with these two classic movies. Jeff, these were my two favorite movies.
These were my two as well. As much as I said negative things about Chain Gang, as I said a million times earlier, it's because I like so much of it so much that those few little things that I was just
got hung up on. It became down to a matter of, like, after I saw Fugitive Chain Gang, like, second, I think. And I immediately was like, this is going to be the one to beat. Like, this one's going to be really hard. Because, A, it's a message movie. It has all those things I'm looking for, like, in the time period.
Yes.
But Lady for a Day just was such a shocking pleasure. And I might have picked it if executive producer Goldstein didn't hate it, like absolutely hated it. And it put me in that mind of like, it's a good movie. Am I on an island here with Lady for a Day?
Certainly not.
I'm happy that you went there, because now our show can encompass both of these movies.
Right. Yeah.
Folks at home, watch them both right now. You should have already watched Lady for a Day when me and Jeff started.
Absolutely. You should have.
Yeah, you should have paused it, watched it, and then come back.
Right. You hear Capra ask, and it's usually like, oh, it's going to be kind of, like romanticizing certain stuff. But I never felt like it was doing that.
It was something so unusual about that movie that like will definitely always stay in my head, of how it undermines like what you think is going to happen in it. You're waiting for all those beats that now we know. And it's funny that this movie came out in the 30s and then it got ignored. Like other movies just followed the crappy tropes of, well, they got to figure out the secret by the end, and like people get repercussions for the things they're doing. Nobody suffers repercussions. I mean, he's arrested for a little bit, like Dan the Dude or Dave the Dude.
Right.
But he's let go, and everyone loves each other. The idea of a city coming together for you to help you on the stupidest lie that you made, like, is so uplifting, and you wish real life were like that. Fugitive was just the tragedy of that character is just what really struck with me. It's just that
Uh-huh.
this guy trying the hardest that he could possibly do to make it in the world, and he's doing everything possible within his power to self-actualize himself.
Uh-huh.
And it's just like the world completely breaks him down, and at the very end he just becomes what the world thinks of him, which is just a criminal. And it's just like so scathing.
And that was my number 2, and it was close. I did have to think about it, where, like you said, with Lady for a Day, it really was like, what the hell is going on? I have no idea how this is going to turn out. And when it was over, I was like, I kind of want more.
I want more in this world.
Yeah,
What
like I
else
want to
these
hang out in
gangsters
this
are up
world
to.
more. Yeah.
Guy betting on whether a fly lands on the sugar cube. What else does he do exactly besides help? Jeff, before we go, what's the give us your rundown of your list 1 to 10. What was your
Oh,
final
crap.
list?
It is worth your time to watch these two. My list had kind of changed because I came in thinking a certain way, and actually a couple of our conversations kind of turned around the way I was thinking about a couple of them. But I'd probably have Henry VIII, Cavalcade, Farewell to Arms, She Done Him Wrong, then Smiling Through.
So our bottom 5 are identical. Smiling
There we
Through, Cavalcade, Farewell to Arms, Private Life, Henry VIII, She Done Him Wrong. I think those 3 in the middle, 42nd Street, State Fair, Little Women, are all very dependent on you as the film goer, right? Like
Probably. Yeah.
State Fair and Little Women are similar in that, like, if you like these kind of like little chunks of life stories, then
Yeah.
these are good movies. If you like musicals at all, 42nd Street you have to watch. You just those Busby Berkeley directed sequences,
Right.
fantastic.
Yeah. As much as I was taken out of the movie when it suddenly became a musical, yes, visually, the choreography was ridiculously good.
As a movie, I would say go watch Gold Diggers of 1933 over this, or some of the old musicals if you like them that we did with Maurice Chevalier all day. Jeff, you missed out on those. Very different. All right, Jeff, this was awesome. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, we broke down Best Picture. We broke down who named the Oscars. I mean, it was all like 6 hours ago we did that, but
Yes. And the wrong Frank did win.
yes, the wrong Frank. Frank Capra deserved the win, Best Director.
I think so.
I wanted so badly to add King Kong to our discussion, and
Maybe that's a short.
maybe that is a short. That was the big picture winner, made the most money of 1933. It was definitely snubbed, and it tells you that the audiences during the Depression were looking for escape. In the back of my head, I was like, would Jeff, the Star Wars guy, pick King Kong over one of these two? Do you think you would pick King Kong over Lady for a Day?
I would not, but I probably would have argued that it should have been not. I think there only should have been 5. I think there should only ever be 5, and you should pick the 5 movies.
Yeah.
And I also believe that like some of these big tentpole things don't get the credit that they deserve for what it takes to make them. I think the winner should be something where you look back. There's too many times where we look back on the winners and you're like, that shouldn't have, like this.
Cavalcade.
Cavalcade
You
shouldn't have
remember
won.
Cavalcade? Yeah.
I know it'll be interesting to see at what point or how many times you actually do land on the one that won.
That's gonna be a weird moment on the show when I'm putting this out there, if me and the guest both pick the movie that won Best Picture, that'll be weird. That maybe that'll be a sign that the Oscars have finally figured it out. Like that they know that they did the right thing. Jeff, this is the last episode of 2020. What year are we in? 2023. You're the last
Wow.
Golden Boy of 2023.
How about that?
Do you have any wishes? Because right now, Old Lang Syne is playing over us. Do you have any wishes for the new
But you're
year?
releasing this on December 1st, right?
Yeah, I know, but we play Old Lang Syne at the end of every episode now. Ever since Gavin's episode, we announced it. It's our end theme credits.
Right.
Do you have any wishes for our listeners in the new year, 2020?
Like a new year? What, just happy new year? I don't know. Look forward. Don't look back like the folks in Cavalcade.
Don't look back. That's a good message. Jeff, thank you again for doing this show. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's it. That's all I got. And we'll see you all in a month for the 7th Academy Awards, January 1st, episode 7. We're moving into a new year. This show's growing. Good luck and God bless.
All right.
Hello, everyone. Jessica Goldstein, executive producer of Golden Boy, here in the editing booth while Kenny is recovering from COVID. But great news. You can help cheer him up by hitting the like and the subscribe button. Let us know what you thought about the movies in the comments and your pick for the Golden Boy. Next episode will be out on January 1st, 2024, so bring your glittery glasses and your noisemakers for the 7th Academy Awards from 1935. Here's your homework. It Happened One Night by Frank Capra. The House of Rothschild by Worker and Landfield. Viva Villa by Conway Hawkes and Wellman. The Thin Man by W.S. Van Dyke. Here Comes the Navy by Lloyd Bacon. Cleopatra by Cecil B. DeMille. One Night of Love by Victor Schertzinger. The Barretts of Wimpole Street by Sidney Franklin. The Gay Divorcee by Mark Sandrich. The White Parade by Irving Cummings. Imitation of Life by John Stahl. And Flirtation Walk by Frank Borzage. Happy holidays to everyone. See you next month.